las oportunidades y retos que se presentan para los institutos nacionales de estadística en el marco de la revolución de los datos. La jornada está dividida esta tarde en dos sesiones. La primera estará ambientada en discusiones alrededor de las fuentes de datos para la medición de la Agenda de Desarrollo post-2015. En este punto es necesario preguntarnos por la posibilidad de sustituir las fuentes de datos tradicionales, como censos y encuestas, por registros administrativos, incluidos los de registro civil, y complementarios de fuentes de datos no tradicionales para obtener información precisa y oportuna para la toma de decisiones. No parece una tarea sencilla y requerirá de nuevas perspectivas desde la academia, el sector público y las mismas organizaciones internacionales. Precisamente para ayudarnos con la perspectiva académica, contamos hoy con la presencia del profesor asociado de la Universidad de Washington, Sam Clark, experto en demografía, metodología cuantitativa y microcomputación. Edilberto Loaiza, Senior Monitoring and Evaluation Advisor del Fondo de Población de las Naciones Unidas. Eric Sausen, director del Open Data Watch. En la segunda sesión, la discusión estará motivada por el debate sobre la capacidad que tienen las instituciones para afrontar desafíos en los que las necesidades de información están sujetas a un conjunto de características en relación con los datos, más rápidos, más desglosados o desagregados y en temas cada vez más diversos, como los que se plantean en los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible. Para dinamizar esta charla contaremos con la participación de Bruce Campbell, director de la División Técnica de UNFPA, Kain Soe, directora de la Organización Central de Población de Birmania, Pali Leola, director de la Oficina de Estadística de Sudáfrica, y Lina Castro, subdirectora de la Autoridad de Estadística de Filipinas, y Ricardo Fuentes, jefe de investigación de Oxfam, Johannes Hotting, director de París 21, y Werner Germani, director ejecutivo de la Fundación ARU Bolivia. A todos ellos les damos la bienvenida a nuestro país y esperamos que tengan una agradable estadía en la ciudad de Cartagena. Para mí y todos los asistentes será un placer compartir esta jornada de trabajo junto a todos ustedes. El eje central de este evento que nos convoca es la revolución de los datos. Y sin lugar a duda, los Institutos Nacionales de Estadística tenemos un papel primordial, pues dicha revolución nos obliga a realizar un esfuerzo transformador en nuestras entidades que trasciendan lo tecnológico, orientado a mejorar la forma en que se producen, se analizan y se utilizan los datos para generar información necesaria de manera oportuna y continua y con la calidad requerida. En este punto, la liberación de los datos y la transparencia se configuran como parte fundamental de esta revolución. Este contexto establece un reto importante para los INES. Vamos a necesitar crear mecanismos y estrategias que nos permitan generar más y nuevas estadísticas, así como garantizar la accesibilidad y disponibilidad de los datos y metadatos, contribuyendo a la transparencia respecto a su producción. Esto nos obligará a construir una mejor relación con los usuarios y a estimular su creatividad, lo que nos llevará a poner en práctica nuevos enfoques para educar a los usuarios, ya sea a través de los círculos académicos, políticos, el sector empresarial o el público en general, a fin de ayudarlos a analizar la información que les damos. En otras palabras, estamos fortaleciendo la cultura estadística. Y hablando de cultura estadística, no puedo dejar de pasar esta oportunidad sin relatarles una pequeña experiencia que tuvimos hace algunos meses en este tema. Voy a contarles la historia de don Miguel Barragán, un habitante de un pequeño municipio en Colombia llamado Anolaima, ubicado a pocas horas de Bogotá. Hacía poco, el DANE había participado con un stand en una importante feria agropecuaria y allí don Miguel conoció nuestro app CIPSA, una aplicación que le permite consultar los precios de frutas, hortalizas, carnes y tubérculos en las diferentes centrales de abasto y estar actualizado para la toma de decisiones oportunas. Esta aplicación le permitía a don Miguel y a miles de usuarios como él conocer las cotizaciones diarias de más de 400 productos que se comercializan en 62 plazas de mercado del país. Pero unas semanas después don Miguel nos escribió sumamente preocupado porque ya no podía utilizar este servicio. Este inconveniente se había presentado a causa de la actualización de los códigos de productos y plazas, pero fue solucionado rápidamente gracias a la comunicación de don Miguel, de tal manera que él y nosotros pudimos resolver rápidamente el asunto. Esto es atención al usuario. Eso es satisfacer las necesidades y eso es cultura estadística. Y en este tipo de aspectos es que tenemos que pensar y trabajar, entre otros. Retomando el tema en cuestión, aunque dicha evolución en su conjunto representa un reto no solo para los institutos nacionales de estadística, sino también para los gobiernos, es importante registrar que en el mundo se han dado debates que registran una creciente tensión entre las demandas sociales de la información y la oferta que se hace de estadísticas. Para muchos las estadísticas oficiales están sujetas a una diversidad de demanda de datos comparables a nivel internacional, datos inmediatos y con mayores niveles de desagregación que permiten abordar con mayores herramientas los análisis sobre los problemas nacionales. Por lo tanto, dada la creciente explosión de estadísticas alternativas, quienes hacemos parte de la comunidad estadística debemos observar con especial cuidado esta situación y preguntarnos qué implica y significa para los cines como productores de estadísticas oficiales la presentación de resultados en tiempos reales. Recordemos que la oportunidad en general no debe remitirse a este hecho únicamente. Es cierto que con la incorporación de nuevas tecnologías y la integración de fuentes tradicionales y Big Data podrían mejorarse los tiempos de entrega y de la mano de estas nuevas fuentes pueden generarse nuevos principios de oportunidad. Las estrategias empleadas para alcanzar una revolución de los datos en las que se fomente y promueva la innovación para cubrir brechas de información debe generar escenarios de deliberación en donde exista responsabilidad compartida de los cines con los demás miembros del Sistema Estadístico Nacional con el fin de fortalecer la producción de más datos y más desagregados, ya sea usando fuentes tradicionales o nuevas como el Big Data. Esto requiere replantear y rediseñar las relaciones institucionales. Por lo tanto, es necesario generar estrategias para lograr alianzas nacionales e internacionales con actores públicos y privados para el intercambio de datos bajo estándares y buenas prácticas internacionales que tengan en cuenta las particularidades de cada país. Para alcanzar este objetivo, los cines requieren una inversión considerable, concertada y sostenida en el fomento de la capacidad estadística nacional basada en estructuras modernas e integradas. Es mediante esta inversión que se puede establecer una labor amplia y eficaz de medición y presentación de informes sobre los alcances logrados en perspectivas sociales, económicas y ambientales bajo el marco de los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible. Bajo esta perspectiva, la revolución de los datos requiere un matiz social y político que nos obliga a generar sinergias entre actores, herramientas, métodos y datos. En este sentido, los sistemas estadísticos y particularmente los cines podrían aprovechar esto preservando su relevancia como productores de información y manteniendo el rol de organismos rectores de la actividad estadística. Es por esto que es necesario promulgar leyes adecuadas en cada país para asegurar el acceso a los datos y reglamentar su uso, respetando al máximo la confidencialidad y actuando con cautela a la hora de almacenar y difundir los datos. además de la utilización más amplia de los datos administrativos como fuente de información estadística, sistemática y coherente, la cobertura temática de las encuestas y el alcance de las fuentes administrativas utilizadas deben ampliarse para aportar al debate actual sobre el desarrollo sostenible. Finalmente, no me resta más que desearles a todos ustedes que disfruten el Cartagena Data Festival. Agradezco a todos por este espacio y damos paso a Johannes, quien será el moderador de esta sesión. Muchas gracias.
So good afternoon again. A very warm welcome to this track. Thank you first of all so much, Dr. Perfetti, for your warm welcoming words and for the introduction. This track is a co-organized track by UNFPA, DANI and Paris 21. We are delighted to have this track. We have in this track two sessions. The session one is mainly addressing the issue of data sources. We have been hearing already about the opportunities and the challenges of possibly blending different sources of data. We have heard in a couple of events already speaking about household surveys and their link or possible substitution via administrative records. We also have heard about the possibilities of integrating non-traditional data sources like big data. So that will be the part of this, the opportunities and challenges of this part of the data revolution will be discussed in the first session, and then the second session will be moderated by Bruce Campbell from UNFPA. This will be in a very innovative setting as well. We will be having a fishbowl, and here we will be talking about the institutional fit of the data revolution of existing institutions. So are the existing institutions fit for purpose? Do they need to change? Do we need new institutions to benefit from the data revolution? Now, I don't want to make yet another long speech of introduction. We have set it up like we will be hearing from each of the panelists here a maximum of 10 minutes intervention. And then I will open up to the floor and we will have a discussion. We started a little late, so we may want to save some time. But I just wanted to say, wanted to point out to one thing that has come up this morning by Danny from Civicus, the CEO from Civicus, and he spoke about tired official data. I found it quite intriguing, and I think this track is really timely to have that track now, because in a couple of events we had so far, the challenges and opportunities and the difficult relationship between national statistical offices, civil society groups, line ministries have come up again and again. And I think it's important that we are bringing the problems to the table. What are the trade-offs in terms of, on the one hand, the very high demand for timely data, for having real-time data, on the other hand, the obligation of statistical offices to produce data according to very set standards and also to ensure quality. So these kind of trade-offs will be at the center of our discussions. Obviously as well, we have the hook of this debate will be the SDGs. So we just had a discussion before lunch about the political process, and we all agree it's just relatively messy. It's very likely that we will be facing a situation of 169 targets to measure, something like 300 indicators and the data to produce, possibly on a reporting base of annual cycle, which will be a huge challenge. So there will be a huge demand for using also non-traditional data sources. So how do we manage this? That will be a very important part of this discussion. So without further ado, I would invite Sam from the University of Washington in Seattle.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me to talk today. I'm going to be relatively brief and restrict or focus my comments to the issue of how to actually make data from traditional and non-traditional sources work together. So first, I just want to review, and I'm coming from an academic background, and I've been working on these issues in a very focused way, and that will probably come through in my comments. So our traditional data sources, censuses, household surveys, things of that nature, have strengths and very significant weaknesses as well. They happen once in a while, so they're not often or even quasi-real time. The data themselves are often stored in ways that are difficult to access and also potentially difficult to use by people who are not specifically trained to do so. Collecting them is often very expensive. And so those are some of the challenges, but the one very, very big advantage that they have is that they're either generalizable or nearly generalizable. So they're designed to make statements about large populations and make statements that are accurate to within some kind of known uncertainty. But along with that, they're often not very deep as well. And by that I mean they have a few dimensions to them. So those dimensions are measured well, they're generalizable, they're measured from time to time, but they do allow us to make statements about whole countries or very large parts of countries with confidence. In contrast, some of the new technologies have almost the mirror image challenges and strengths. So these are things like data from social media, cell phone call metadata, what I've heard called data exhaust in general, the byproducts of other activities that people are doing online and so on. So these kinds of sources of data are very timely. Things are unfolding in real time and you can get very rapid assessments of what's happening. They're potentially easier to access and the cost is much, much lower in most cases because they are, in fact, the byproduct of things that are paid for in other ways. So they, another advantage they have is that they are very high coverage in the sense that they include a lot of people and cover lots of space, but this comes with a big caveat in that they are not designed to actually say something about a specific population. So they're not technically representative or generalizable in the way that we normally think of a well-designed data source. And also, related to that, they typically describe populations that are affluent in the sense that they can interact with modern technology. So they miss entirely these vulnerable populations that are of particular interest to many of us. So those are the two broad categories of data that we are dealing with. And the challenge seems to revolve around interoperability and how do we bring these two kinds of data together, capitalize on the strengths of both of them, and attempt to have the weaknesses balanced out by the other one. So this is very challenging. One of the groups that I work with in my normal job is attempting to do exactly this, but just using traditional data sources. And we've discovered that it's not easy to do. So just before I give an example, I want to just run through some of the ideas that I think are going to be key to creating the kind of interoperability that we need. The first one is to resolve some standards so that we have a standards-based way of managing these data, and we attach to them enough metadata that we can create intermediate data forms that are then comparable across the two different big types of data, and even within traditional data and within kind of new or big data types of data. Then we need to develop a whole suite of new statistical methods to understand what each of the kinds of data mean in relation to each other and how we can meaningfully create new methods that produce inference using combinations of these kinds of data sources. So we need new theory, we need new models, and we need to think a lot about the standards and how to create intermediate data forms that are comparable and effectively allow data exchange. So I'll quickly run through one of the examples that we've been working on recently. It's one of the MDGs, and I think one of the MDGs that most people who work on health are very focused on, and that's child mortality. So child mortality in Africa is a very difficult thing to measure. Most of the information comes from the demographic and health surveys, and occasionally from censuses as well. So we chose to attempt to develop a new way of analyzing the DHS surveys and combine with the DHS surveys information from health and demographic surveillance systems, which are very small, not representative, but very intense data collection systems that do a very good job of collecting highly detailed data and very timely data on small populations. So we wanted to combine these two very different kinds of data, collected using completely different methodologies and with completely different properties. So we first had to develop an intermediate form that was comparable across the two data sets, and that was the traditional 5Q0 measure for child mortality. That's the probability of dying between birth and age 5. And we developed a way of extracting that information from all of the DHS surveys together, taking account of their sampling design so that we had a measure of uncertainty that was valid for measures of 5Q0 at a subnational level from the DHS. Then we did the same thing through a completely different approach for the HDSS data. And then we had an intermediate form that we could put into a model that brought them together. And we adapted a Bayesian spatiotemporal estimation framework that took all of those measures of child mortality with their associated measures of uncertainty and produced for us an estimate across space and moving through time for the whole country that brought together all of the DHS surveys in Tanzania. I think there are 8 of them, 8 or 10, I've forgotten exactly how many, and these measures of child mortality coming from a completely different system. And it worked out. It took a lot more work than we were originally envisioning. We had to develop all kinds of new methods to do it. And this taught us that, yes, it is possible, and very desirable because it's a completely new estimate of child mortality that we think has properties that improve significantly on what other people have done so far. But the devil was really in the details. We had to think through this all the way back to the data collection systems in both the DHS and the DSS, and think very carefully about how to calculate our intermediate form and then how to bring that all back together. So interoperability is our main issue. There seems to be all kinds of ways that we can approach this. The devil is in the details. And now a few more thoughts just about general ways that we might approach this whole set of issues going into the future. I think that the most important kind of medium to long-term thing that we can do is to provide a new way of educating people who are going into these fields. My personal situation is interesting. I was first educated in engineering and computer science and biology, and then demography. So I have a very detailed understanding of data science. I can program computers. I can do all of that. I know a lot about the biology of health, and now I have a substantive degree that allows me to really look at the questions and so on and put all of that together. It was difficult. It took way too long. I lost a lot of income while I was in school for years, so I don't suggest that that's what everyone should do. But I think what would be nice is to take a group of computer scientists and people who are really interested in the new forms of data, the big data kind of people, and at least expose them a little bit to one area of a substantive field. So maybe demography, maybe epidemiology, maybe economics, so that those people have a feeling for what their data might be used for at the end of the day. And some of them will then become very interested in developing more knowledge in that way. And I think that the same is true of our substantive tracks. So I teach in a program where I have graduate students learning demography, and I'm appalled at how little they really understand about data. Even when they get done with our entire track and they have their PhD in demography, they really don't know much about how data are collected, how they're managed, and really what the opportunities might be in terms of doing new and innovative things with data. So those people need more training in actual data. So somewhere in the middle, when we give people both parts of the puzzle, I think we're going to produce the kind of person who can really make really exciting innovations in this general area. And I think the last thing I want to say is that it's very tempting to be very excited about lots of data. And I think that what we need to remember is that lots and lots of data really aren't the answer. Just a few really good data, be they traditional or new or a combination, are enough to really do the job, and we shouldn't be kind of blinded by large amounts of data. And I think that's it for me.
Thank you. Oops. Not work. Thank you so much, Stem. That was really very concise and I would say to some extent thought-provoking intervention, because you mapped out how rigorous and how complicated it will be to use the different sources of data, and you also explained that even using different forms of what we might call even traditional data, how much energy and how much training and how much education it will need. You spoke about developing new theories, developing new models and standards, and all this will take a lot of time. Now my little worry, and maybe this is a short follow-up question, is this might be the way to go forward for national statistical offices that have to comply to certain standards. Now my worry would be, or my assumption would be, that maybe the private sector and other entities, institutions will say, okay, that's all fine, this is a sum model, but we just do it differently, and we have to do it much quicker. So how do you see in terms of how can we balance this off between, on the one hand, a very rigorous way as you described it to us, but on the other hand, this incredible demand also of policymakers who will say, okay, that's the gold way, but maybe we have to do some shortcuts. So how would you feel about the shortcuts?
I don't know any shortcuts right at the moment, but I do think that a way to get going quickly would be to pick one or two very consequential issues and then focus energy on those and move rapidly on those and use those as a kind of blueprint for how to move forward with other things. And I think obviously then you would try to pick a group of people who could make very quick progress on that and give them enough support to do it. Yeah. I think it is a big challenge, and I think it's going to happen more or less organically as many people attempt to solve the same problem simultaneously.
And these topics could be what? You think about sectorial issues, or you think about?
I think it depends which field or area you're thinking about, but whatever is a very consequential problem. For all my work is in Africa, and there are 2 or 3 key health issues that I think would be good targets for that kind of issue. I also think that the civil registration vital statistics challenge as a whole is one that could be used to justify this kind of effort. But focus on the basic functions of the CRVS system and not get kind of distracted with a whole bunch of other things. So you know which side of the multiple SDG indicator argument I stand on. 10 would be great.
Okay, thank you so much. That's really very helpful also for giving us an advice where we could maybe somewhat of a shortcut. I'm thinking about when we, in terms of the data collection, you all know about Gallup and Gallup collecting this world poll data, and it has been criticized for their sample size. But still, I mean, this world poll data is an established tool for information. So it's exactly along those lines. I think we should at least be aware of the trade-offs we make, and also to alert policymakers and the citizens, what does it actually mean to have a sample size of 1,000 or of 2,000 people versus a full-blown sample size, and what does it mean to have a rigorous way of approaching those things versus maybe a shortcut. I have the feeling we will be coming back to this, but let me turn now to Edilberto, to your intervention.
Good afternoon. Buenas tardes a todos y a todas. Voy a tratar de dar respuesta a las 3 o 4 preguntas con las cuales nosotros iniciamos la discusión. Y para eso me voy a basar fundamentalmente, porque no es necesario reinventar la rueda, ¿no? I'm going to use this document, a World Accounts, in which we made a very detailed diagnostics of the situation regarding the national statistical systems when we talk about the data revolution, particularly when we refer to the Sustainable Development Goals. In doing that, I'm going to divide my presentation in 3 elements in trying to answer the question. The first one is emphasizing the opportunities and the challenges. Then I will focus on very quickly on what is the data that we need and we want. And then finally, what shall we do? So the first question that we started, or at least that I started with, was how can we substitute traditional data sources? And traditional data sources there is only referred as census and surveys with administrative records. For me, administrative records are also traditional sources, but anyways. And how do we complement them with not traditional, new data sources to obtain accurate and timely information for decision-making processes? Excuse me, and I have two answers for that. The first one is we want to keep all traditional data sources, CRBS, census, and household surveys, as well as administrative records. We don't want to substitute or to replace them. Now, what we should do is we should be able to complement them with non-traditional data sources or methods, whatever it is, while using the same principles and standards that are currently guiding or will need to be developed to guide the traditional sources in the future. Now, the first question after that was, what are the challenges and opportunities? Let me briefly talk about the challenges. The MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals and Sustainable Development Goal processes, have made more visible the data and knowledge gaps that exist at country level, particularly regarding uncounted populations. And we have been talking about this since we started this festival. Limiting the capacity by governments to act and to communicate with the respective constituencies. And in that process, we have been talking about accountability issues. It is also not having enough high-quality data. It's a big challenge for many developing countries. And here we're talking about countries in which the data is very poor quality or poor quality, situations in which the data arrives too late, and too many issues are still not properly covered. I was really surprised recently when we found out that in Africa, there are only a small number of countries that can collect data on labor force participation. Older people, disability, violence against women, and so on and so forth. There are also cases in which data are not used or usable, data that are not transferred to statistical offices. The case of the civil registration. In many countries, the viral events are registered, but they are not transferred to the statistical office, which are the ones in charge of the viral statistics system. Agencies with mandate to collect public information, the national statistical systems, which includes the National Statistical Office, are not always well suited to ensuring their data and information are used by stakeholders, and therefore the possible facilitating role of civil society and the private sector. Monitoring needs, as in the case of the Sustainable Development Goals now, for existing and emerging issues, will require substantial additional investments. Fortunately, many of these challenges, the one that I mentioned before, are now being addressed under the post-2015 development agenda and are included as part of the Sustainable Development Goals as challenges for countries, civil society, private sector, international organizations, and the global community at large. Yet, we are in a situation right now in which we are still struggling trying to define what to do with 17 goals and 169 targets. The Sustainable Development Goals initiatives are broader in scope and therefore much more ambitious and universal. That's the cost that we will have to pay. The MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, were or has been accused of being incomplete and not to address all the issues. Now we think that we have a bigger picture included. The development and implementation and monitoring of Sustainable Development Goals will require actions at the levels at which the challenge resides, and we specifically refer to economic, social, and environmental issues. And with emphasis on inclusion, participation, and with the idea of to leave no one behind. For the accountability of the actors involved, additional data will be needed, and the national statistical systems, including the National Statistical Office, should be equipped with the needed resources. Here we're talking about human and financial resources to deliver in the production and use of the required data. The data revolution provides a set of opportunities to address these data challenges, to maximize the benefits of the needed data to develop policies and interventions, to monitor its implementation, and to provide evidence for accountability at the desired level. It is the responsibility of the government to develop and put in place rules and systems to ensure a future in which data and information becomes the main ingredients to reduce existing inequalities. The national statistical systems, working with all existing stakeholders, as well as multilateral system, to develop the needed trust to deliver on data as a public good. The task on hand refers specifically to the development of legal frameworks, guaranteeing data privacy and security of data for individuals, and ensured its quality and independence. It is also about balancing the stakes between public and private interests and the creation of systems that aim to reduce inequalities, talking about transfers of finance and technological expertise. And this morning there was a very interesting question about the speeds of the data revolution. We have to think about that when we think about technological transfers, technological expertise. The emphasis is on the centrality of the national statistical systems, including the National Statistical Office as the guardian of the public data, to government's efforts to maximize the benefits of the data revolution for sustainable development. National statistical systems will need to adapt and transform to respond to the new landscape, which calls for the incorporation of new data sources, development of inclusion of data produced by all government departments, and with emphasis on the production of standardized and comparable data, using internationally agreed standards for reading, processing, tabulating, communicating, disseminating, and utilizing. This cycle at the end should also match the decision-making, monitoring, and reporting cycle. There was a session this morning about the investments and the statistics that we have about the investments and the expenditures and the budgets that exist. And one almost common denominator that you can see in those efforts that for me was really surprising to see how much is being done by NGOs on that area. But it's the lack of connection between expenditures and budgets and results. And as long as we don't connect the two pieces, we're going to be struggling in how we make the data revolution a reality. The national statistical systems should also devote attention to the technical and financial investments needed to enable the before-mentioned changes. That is, via collaboration with private institutions to harvest the benefits of new technology and innovations. Now, the second and third questions ask, what are the implications, like legal, economic, political, and institutional, for countries using new data sources of information for official statistics? And what new and innovative tools and techniques are available for data collection, processing, and dissemination? Which ones are the more feasible? And I'm trying to respond to those questions, even though because I'm sincerely, from my perspective as a demographer, as a statistician, I'm much more concerned about how would we make what we have available efficient and relevant, rather than think about what is the future, what is what we need before trying to solve the problems that we have, what we have. So for me, in reality, it's what we said in the report. What is the data that we need and want? And what we want and need is data that will help to improve the living conditions of the population at large, data that will empower citizens to control their decisions and lives, data that propels sustainable development by making sure that national statistical systems develop data for everyone, data for now and for the future. The data revolution calls for the design and development of a data ecosystem in which governments empower public institutions, that is, national statistical systems, including statistical office, and guaranteeing its independence, to put in place needed regulatory frameworks to ensure data privacy, data protection, open data by all the producers, and to develop capacity for innovation and use of newly available technologies. We are talking about new and greater investments that are needed in data by governments, donors, international and regional organizations, particularly to countries in which a statistical capacity system is weak, to develop infrastructure and implement needed standards for data quality production and utilization. The national statistical systems' day-to-day operation will benefit from these standards, particularly those related to data collection, production, anonymization, timeliness, dissemination, and utilization to guarantee that data is transformed into public good. National statistical systems, and particularly the case of the national statistical offices in particular, need to be empowered, resourced, and granted independence to be able to adapt to the new landscape and challenges under the Sustainable Development Agenda. Data literacy is also a must in the landscape of the Sustainable Development Goals. What shall we do now? I think that what we need is a strong commitment from governments to strengthening the roles of the National Statistical System, and in particular of the National Statistical Office. What we proposed in the report, The World That Counts, was to develop a program of action.
Elisberto, I'm very sorry. Can you please come to the end because we are running a bit out of... Thanks
this
so
is
much.
This is my last
fantastic.
one.
Sorry
my last one. And I was saying that this is basically a program of action. It's a call to work on principles and standards, technology, innovation, and analysis, the issue of capacity resources, and leadership and governance. We had the report in Spanish brought here to the conference, and I would glad to see that all the copies that we put there disappear by lunchtime. And for a while, I was thinking maybe it was an error in the report and somebody picked them up, but I'm sure that everybody took a copy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Elisberto. I'm sorry for pushing you a bit in terms of the timing. I think it was very useful that you framed our discussion here, the session, in terms of the opportunities and challenges at large that the data revolution provides for statistical offices. You also refer to our report, so that's very much appreciated. In terms of the framing and opportunities of the SDGs, I found it also very useful that while we see a lot of challenges in being able to produce all the data, you mentioned the opportunities also to get the attention for national statistical offices, possibly to find the money for really doing and strengthening the systems that we have been looking for so long, but it wasn't really in the center of the discussion as we have seen it now. So thank you so much for your intervention. We now we have a guest of surprise. We have the general statistician from South Africa, Pali Leola, in this session, not in the fishbowl session, because he has to catch a plane earlier on than he expected. So Pali, thanks so much to be with us, and please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Johannes. I'm sorry that I've disrupted the proceedings, but it so happens that I have to be back in South Africa. I have to be addressing Parliament on Thursday on the SDGs. So this is how life goes in this area of statistics, and you have to ensure that the key clients, which is parliamentarians, understand what all this SDGs are about. So I've been summoned back home. So on the outline of the presentation, I have 10 slides that I'll go through very quickly. I've annotated the presentation that what we are talking about in terms of the information system is a science-based knowledge system. And this system addresses a number of things. And that is, what does it address? And is this known, understood, and appreciated? And what is this system? In terms of answering those questions, I mean, this knowledge science-based system is integral to knowing, understanding, and appreciating socio-economic and environmental phenomena, and is well captured in the SDGs. And it addresses pressing problems of development and well-being of people and planet. And it's increasingly, as a consequence, a very federated system driven largely by technology. And for it to be managed, it requires authority. And there are two levels of this authority. It's a knowledge-based authority, so that people can participate and comply within that system. But it also requires invoking the law for implementing sanctions when people don't comply. And of course, it thrives in the world of electronic networks. That's why with technology, we see a best in information systems. And of course, its success depends on literacy levels, whether citizens can use the data, and adequacy or otherwise of systems that limits limits to freedom imposed by the system itself. So in a democracy, you can thrive in this system. In a dictatorship, it's impossible. Now, given that it is federated, what are then the conditions for working through this system? It needs to be coordinated, and with leadership rights and privileges. And it has to be positioned from a demand side and from a supply side. And of course, one needs to understand the statistical environment. You need to activate key actions, and of course, map out the risks if no actions are taken in this system. So what are the things that presuppose or preconditions for success in coordination? To coordinate, you have to have a mandate. And to have that mandate, you have a political or governance process and processes and systems that allocate rights. So we need to understand what are those processes that allocate rights. It has to be predictable in terms of production of high-quality data. It must secure public trust. And it must adopt and embrace data revolution. The question is big data new? No, it isn't. I think at the presentation that we got is that it is not. Libraries were big data at that time. Big data is still administrative records, such as records of persons when they get registered. Is technology new? No, not. It is not. But what is new is a culture of breaking discipline boundaries. That's what is new. We are faced with a situation where we have to get out of our cocoons and interact. That is what is new. And what is required in this environment that is new is new forms of leading and leadership. And I think then I can entertain you with what we are doing in South Africa in terms of proposed legislative changes. And there are 4 things that we want to do in this proposed new legislative changes. One is implementing statistical geography, that we take into account the power of geography, the spatio-temporal aspects of phenomena are more explicitly and more deliverable when you deal with geographic dimensions of those. We need to coordinate, look at coordinating mechanisms and compliance in order to optimize informatics. Informatics enables you to optimize efficiencies and effectiveness. And of course, we have to embrace data revolution, including big data, so that we can retrieve, store, deliver with speed. And of course, we need to create a statewide statistical service. So under statistical geography, there are quite a number of things, geospatial information, and of course, we have a Spatial Data Infrastructure Act of 2003, which has been gathering dust, but I think now we see that it can come to life. And of course, in our National Development Plan, geospatial information is actually promoted. And then, of course, the intention is to transform the system of information from a temporal-based kind of system to a spatial-temporal statistical system. In terms of strengthening coordination mechanisms, the Statistics Act mandates the Statistician General to coordinate, but issues to be addressed is what about the national strategy? What about the national statistics system? How do we negotiate and renegotiate our mandates in the presence of the new, and who has to be mandated to do things? And then, of course, strategic change, which is the responsibility of heads of organs of state towards statistical production. And heads of statistical of states, of units of organs of state, it's not about the government. It's organs of state, the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive, and everybody else who is governed under that system through a process of voting. So everybody, including the private sector, have a say in this. And so the strategic change is the responsibility of these organs of state in responding to this data revolution. And of course, embracing data revolution is not part of the Statistics Act, and is not specific on this, but these are things that we have to look at, including areas of modeling, capacity building, quality of data, including getting data scientists. And creating a statewide statistics service. The Act currently is not specific on this, but a professional body of statisticians, code of ethics, statistical literacy and capability, and the strategic change is a capable statistics system based on ethical conduct. And finally, institutional arrangements are around where are the reporting lines? Is it accountable to the minister, or is it part of accountable to Parliament? And in terms of operational issues, it's whether you have a symmetry or an asymmetric system. Asymmetry for operational effectiveness and convenience, and symmetry for ensuring that there is fair play in this. So, but those things are pragmatic considerations that when you run a system, you have to really consider. And of course, the strategic change is a delivery model coordinating statistical production to respond to state requirements. I thank you. And I unfortunately have to step off back home. It is not about the current xenophobic attacks that we are having in the country that is causing me to go back, but it's another set of circumstances. I said I have to go to Parliament. But I must say that we have dressed ourselves in a very shameful cloak of xenophobic attacks, and I'm sure you have seen this on the news. We trust that we'll overcome this, but it's a very bad patch in our own history. It's not the Mandela land that we have at the moment. It's a different land altogether. We wish that we will be able to overcome this. So I thank you very much, and I have to step off as soon as.
Thank you very much, Pali. Safe travels back, and I think it was extremely useful for you to have you hearing from a perspective of a leading person in the statistical community, but also from a head of statistics of a country. We heard from a researcher perspective, from an international organization representative, and from you. And as you have to address Parliament, we can see how important the issue is. What I particularly appreciated, you brought in your topic, and if you have to go, safe travels, as I said, but you brought in the issue of leadership, the importance of leadership, which actually runs through so far through our, you also mentioned in one of your points, in one of your bullets, it was also data literacy and statistical capacity and literacy as an issue. So this is in terms of if we want to use these different data sources, which is the hard core of our conversation here, and the different data coming from different sources, blending them, the requirements it has for the users and for the producers, it's a huge challenge which may also call into questions our existing educational models. We hear from time to time data scientists, but I think that's maybe something also we have to continue to think about as this track goes forward in terms of the change in institutions and in terms of capacity building of people. And maybe even for the end of the whole conference, as this topic has come up so often, it might be very important. Now, let me then turn to Shaida Badi. Shaida, if you want to take the floor, and I think Shaida will bring in yet another perspective, which is very important. It's about the open data and national statistical offices' incentives and need to open up their data. So we are looking forward to listen to Scheida and open data and the data revolution.
Thank you. Thanks, Johannes. So we're trying to see how we can bring new data sets for SDGs and for this increased demand for data using new methods and new technologies. But my talk is going to be on how can we make sure that the national statistical data is in fact open and accessible. So it's a sort of a different perspective, but it adds value to this, bringing the data out and making it usable. So first of all, I mean, everybody who's here in the Data Festival knows what's the definition of open data, so I don't need to say this, but it's, you know, it's really to make the data freely available and accessible without any discrimination, and as much as possible usable by users. One of the things I always find interesting when you talk about open data and national statistical offices is that even the ones who have not adopted open data, when you look at their statistical plan, we call them NSDSs, you see a lot of these attributes, in fact, in the NSDSs. So it's kind of like, okay, let's get on with it and have the open data actually adopted by the country. The other thing I wanted to mention was that in my heart, I think open data is very close, maybe not quite equal to the data revolution, but is a very close part of the data revolution. In fact, I have some of the goals of the data revolution that I have gathered from some really smart people in this room. And if you look at it, you know, you see that open data is, in fact, has a lot to do with all the different goals that we have, whether we're talking about improving core statistics or building literacy or actually reaching out to more people and, in fact, getting the SDG data sorted out and together. So in addition, I mean, this makes a lot of sense that open data should be really included in the statistical plan of the countries. But in addition, even if we didn't have this movement of data revolution and, you know, all of us sort of, you know, wearing the data revolutionary hats, I think it makes a lot of sense. We see a lot of demand, growing demand for data from all sorts of corners of country and, of course, nationally and internationally, from media and citizens and from global initiatives. But also we see a lot of, on the supply side, we see a lot of opportunities for open data in terms of modernizing helping to modernize the statistical system, increasing the coverage and reach for the audience, and kind of raising the profile of the national statistical offices. So in addition to that, we see also the growing support for open data. We see that everywhere you open up, you know, from the UN, from the World Bank, from the private sector, there are a lot of partnerships being offered, technical, financial systems being offered, and a lot of knowledge sharing. And of course, much more needs to be done. But there's quite a bit of support for open data for countries who want to adopt it. So if you add all that up, in short, if you have growing demand, supply-side opportunities, availability of technical support, and of course the political support that you have within the country, because many of these countries are adopting open government, open data, I think open data is really a unique business opportunity for national statistical offices. So this is kind of my sort of call for let's do something about it. But in addition to that, in research we see, because we also have to sell this to our, you know, sort of the politicians in the countries. The research and a lot of work also shows that it has a lot of value, economic value, and many of you have seen this work of the McKinsey, that it actually shows the value of the unlocked across 7 domains. That number is so big for me sometimes, I mean, I can't even put my head around it. But it's, you know, it comes from McKinsey, so it's we all have to take a second look but, you know, somewhat believe it. Of course, there's a lot of other research that's being done. I don't expect you to read this slide, but this slide shows the impact of open data in many sectors, which has been researched. And, you know, now we see a lot of impact on accountability, for example, but some of us sort of have a dream that as open data is adopted further and further, we see more economic and also a lot of social value from open data. But for now, it's really a strong tool for accountability and transparency. We see a lot of countries through the Open Government Partnership that are adopting open data. Every time I look at the OGP site, I see more countries. The last time I looked, it was about 65 plus countries who have signed up, and many of them have done these 3 colors, which is Action 1, Action 2, and the sort of the signing up and Action 1 and Action 2. But you see that there are a lot of activities from the from governments to sign up to open data. Now, however, you knew that that was coming up, but the National Statistical Offices, when we take a deep look at National Statistical Offices and how much of them are actually adopting open data, it doesn't look that good. We've been looking at the 2 famous indices that are looking at the openness in the governments. One is the Open Data Index, and the other one is Open Data Barometer. And you see the number of data sets that each one of them covers, and only the ones that I've just colored, circled in orange, you see that they come close to National Statistical Office products or official statistics. So we definitely want to get more of the data sets from the National Statistical Offices included in the open government data. And we want to be able to actually monitor that and see how it's progressing. So in my group, we've been looking at building an inventory of data sets which National Statistical Offices actually have opened, and kind of a way of analyzing it and being able to sort of make a summary of what this country's status of the statistical data is looking. So our focus is, of course, the NSO websites, and we're looking at data which is very close to the SDG world, which is of the social, economic, and environmental indicators for 20 different categories, and sort of score them based on coverage and openness. The 2 dimensions that I mentioned, the coverage and openness, each one of them also breaks down into other subsectors. I'm not going to read that, but coverage also, for example, covers sort of the geographic coverage as well as the disaggregation of data. And openness means whether the data is downloadable, usable, or has metadata, or whether there's a terms of use or what's going on with that data. So it kind of takes a deep look. The point of explaining this to you was that just to say that we've just completed a bunch of countries, some 9 countries, and in fact we're doing more. We're starting to do 70 countries and doing a deep dive on measuring the openness of these countries. And what we see here is that these are the sample of the countries that we have done here. I have not named them so that we don't distract ourselves from the concept of what we're trying to achieve. But overall, you will see that the overall coverage, the coverage in some countries might be better than openness. And of course, the overall score also helps. But that basically means that in some cases, the coverage is pretty good, but the openness is actually a barrier for data accessibility and data dissemination. So that's a tremendously important thing for us to monitor and sort of see how the status of countries are. So very quickly, I just have a couple of more slides to go through and to show that the moving of NSOs towards open data, I think, is tremendously important, but also for us to keep an eye on what's holding these countries back from adopting open data, and how can that, how can we help to turn some of these challenges into opportunities. We've been looking at, there's been a large survey. In fact, Tarek, who's here in the audience, knows about this survey of asking National Statistical Offices what their worries are. Here's a word, kind of a crowd of what the worries are. And as you can see, there's a lot of worries, and some of them are very, very important for us to pay attention to, but the fears are high cost, privacy, and so on. But, okay, I think these are very important considerations which need to be addressed. So, but the NSOs have a huge opportunity to take on open data, particularly, I think, when there's a country that has an open data agreement, part of the OGP. It would be terrific if the NSO can actually build on that and become part of that initiative. And there's a number of things they need to do, but none of them is really that difficult that would stop the open data movement in that country for NSOs. And there's a lot of technical stuff that they have to do. Again, those are, this is to say that we acknowledge those are technical challenges that countries have to take on. But there's no showstopper in terms of technical capabilities. Some of the countries have done, and others can join in. But this is my final slide, and my final slide is that we have an opportunity now through everybody, we now all talking about this global partnership for development data, but this is a tremendously important time for us for this global partnership to really include open data as sort of as a key really to unlock the data revolution. And my big point here is on the last point is that we do need to have measurements and tools to be able to measure how we're making that progress and who's falling behind. And this is not really for naming and shaming, but is really for trying to see where things are and how we can help each other to finally get to where we want. And again, I really believe that the open data is a key that can unlock the power of data revolution for all of us. Thank you very much.
Yeah, now it works. Thanks. Thanks so much, Shaida. I think this was, you said in the beginning of your pitch, I can even say pitch, selling open data. You did it very successfully, and I think it fits very nicely actually in our discussion here in terms of the opportunities of NSOs to open up. And the lineup actually works very nicely because then we have Mauricio who will maybe conclude this first part of interventions. You want to... You would be in... Yeah, you could. I mean, I was just wanted to play the ball to you. So if you want to say something about the pitch of Shaida, about the usefulness of open data and NSO, so if you... But maybe before I do so, I would have a quick question to Shaida. This is... I'm convinced, but I hear some people say this is all fine with the open data, but open data is all good, but it's not really used. So apparently there are examples of that countries like Kenya open up their data, it's out there, but nobody uses it. So what do we do? I mean, is it good enough just to open the data and having McKinsey saying it's $3 trillion, but this seems to be like a hypothetical figure and number if nobody really uses it. So how do you go the mile from just putting it out there to that citizens would be using all that stuff?
Well, I think, first of all, there's a lot of statistics available that when you open up, actually your usage goes up. Even some of the most beautiful open data websites, when they go from closed to open, they see increase in usage, and we have that statistics. The other point is that I think in many ways, we have to improve our dissemination policies and dissemination methods, and also, getting closer to the users and really knowing what they are after. But finally, I strongly believe, and it may sound stupid to you, but I think supply creates demand. So if you put the data out there, if you start, even with a smaller number of users and show the value from that data, it can really help the users, but also it gives you feedback as data providers. But what we find from open data is the managers actually become, I hate to say, smarter and become actually linked much more to their users, and so they learn from that feedback loop, and they come back and sort of maybe adjust and adapt their processes and their content, both in methods and also the content of the data.
Thank you so much for these additional words. Now we are coming to the end of this first round of interventions, and please thank you first of all for being so patient. We have then Mauricio who will conclude this session, but then we have times for question and answers still. I mean, we're running a little bit behind schedule, but we had one speaker in this session that was originally planned for the other one. So please already start to think about a question or a comment. I will open up once Maurizio had a chance to make it short, if you want to say a few words about either open data or about any other thing that you have heard so far, because you are the person who is in charge. So it would be interesting from your perspective in terms of these challenges of using different data sources. We talked about the capacity issues, training issues. We talked about standards. We talked about lots of things. So it would be very interesting. How do you relate to all this?
Sí, yo pienso que hay varios temas fundamentales. Lo primero es que no basta con tener el acceso a Big Data, porque se requieren varios elementos adicionales además del acceso. Primero, de ese Big Data, ¿qué se puede usar para fines estadísticos y qué no? Porque no siempre todo se puede usar para fines estadísticos. Lo segundo es cuál va a ser esos estándares que vamos a definir en términos de calidad para el uso de esa información de Big Data y cómo vamos a definir esos estándares. Ese es un punto crucial y esencial. El acceso indica la necesidad fundamental de repensar las relaciones institucionales entre el público y privado, quizás a través de modificaciones de los marcos jurídicos, quizás a través de alianzas público-privadas o unas combinaciones de la misma, pero ese acceso además tiene que ser un acceso continuo. El otro tema es cómo se usa la Big Data y pues aquí hay un tema esencial que es, o sea, las capacidades que se tienen desde el ámbito de los recursos humanos y de los sistemas para el uso de esas informaciones, y eso requiere necesariamente de innovaciones en muchos ámbitos, tanto para el uso como para la difusión de la información del Big Data. Y esto pues lleva a un tema importante que también fue mencionado, bueno, cómo vamos a fortalecer esa integración de fuentes de información tradicionales y no tradicionales, porque se requieren necesariamente de ambas. Y todo esto también lleva a la necesidad de fortalecimientos de intercambios con la academia. Tiene que haber fortalecimientos desde el ámbito de la formación del recurso humano, de los nuevos requerimientos, de nuevas formas de entender los datos, y pues el rol de las universidades, de los centros de investigación se vuelven fundamentales. Y en términos del marco legal, pues todos los temas de reservas y privacidad de los datos pues son un big issue que hay que revisar en estos marcos legales, ampliando obviamente esos mandatos estadísticos para poder incorporar el Big Data. Por último, yo diría, hay muchos países que tienen un sistema muy avanzado y desarrollado de registros administrativos, pero hay muchos otros países que no. Y pienso que además parte de registros administrativos pueden ser parte también de Big Data. Por ejemplo, en el caso colombiano, las fuentes de información de lo que se conoce como el PILA, que es donde están registradas todas las registros de afiliación a seguridad social, de salud, de pensiones, etcétera. Primero son bases muy grandes, pero segundo implican los movimientos de personas en el mercado laboral de distintas maneras, de tal manera que un registro administrativo también puede ser visto, pues no solo por el tamaño de la información, sino por lo que hay detrás de la información, como este Big Data. Y eso pues me parece muy importante que no lo perdamos de vista, porque pues en muchos países el desarrollo de los registros administrativos como fuente de estadística no ha sido igualmente desarrollado que en otros países, y eso pues es fundamental que no se pierda de vista. Pero por último, algo que mencionábamos antes de comenzar es, sin duda, pues los retos son muy grandes, los retos son inmensos en lo jurídico, en la formación de recursos humanos, en cómo vamos a definir los estándares, en los sistemas, etcétera, los marcos jurídicos, estas alianzas, pero quizás aún en medio de esos retos, yo pienso que uno puede identificar avances importantes en el uso de Big Data para información. Nosotros en el caso colombiano, como lo mencionaba ayer, nosotros, por ejemplo, para información de índices de precios y de precios de vivienda, nosotros estamos cogiendo información de las grandes bases de datos, de los grandes almacenes de cadena, de los grandes inmobiliarias y constructores del país, de sus bases de datos diarias. Estamos cogiendo información que nos alimenta a nosotros, nuestras bases de datos, y ese es un inicio, un principio de uso de Big Data en el país. Así existan esos retos, de tal manera que sí hay maneras de encaminarse paso a paso al Big Data a pesar de esos retos, y que sí es posible el uso para efectos estadísticos.
Thank you so much again. I'm very happy that you had this positive connotation at the end, because I think otherwise we can be overwhelmed by all the challenges. And it's good to see that progress is made and that you start to use big data. And we also have to recognize we are at the beginning of a completely new era. Emmanuel Letouzzi keeps saying this is a new data ecosystem with big data. And I believe we have a paper on this, he mentioned yesterday, about big data, and as a sort of something different than just using the data. It's just much more. It changes communities, it changes capacities. So I think that links also to what you were saying in terms of incremental change, starting with small projects, starting to use the data, learning, maybe readjusting while we are going ahead. That seems to be the way forward. I'm pretty sure we're coming back to this in the second part when we talk about the institutional change that is necessary to fully benefit from this new information and sources of data. But let me now open up for any comments and questions. I see the lady in the third row.
Gracias. Yes, I have a question in Spanish. So, agradezco la información del panel. Aquí se ha hablado bastante sobre la importancia de las estadísticas para combatir la pobreza y lograr el desarrollo sostenible. Pero el desarrollo sostenible también tiene que ver con generar un crecimiento de la clase media y generar nuevos negocios. Entonces, sí es importante, así como lo anotó el director del DINE, trabajar en traductores de información, porque las estadísticas nacionales tienen mucha información para la pequeña empresa, pero la pequeña empresa y la microempresa, estos pequeños negocios, no tienen la capacidad de leer esa información. Y estos traductores de grandes datos estadísticos no necesariamente tienen que ser personas o entidades públicas. También pueden ser academia, como ya se mencionó, pero también investigadores o personas que trabajan con datos. Por lo que pienso que deben haber ejemplos, si ustedes los pueden mencionar, ya mencionaron algunos, pueden haber ejemplos de cómo se está traduciendo estos datos para negocios, ¿no? De mejor manera, de manera mucho más sencilla, pero también pensando que esa información puede ser construida desde la sociedad civil, desde quienes trabajan con datos de una manera más, digamos, sencilla, ciudadana, con gráfica y con información que sea más fácil de leer para la empresa.
Excellent question. I think that is the question for Maurizio. We collect more questions and then I give the floor back to the panelists. Dosi?
Thank you. Mine is not a question but a comment. It's a pity that Pali had to run away, but I'd like his presentation very much. Since our community, the statistical community, discovered geography, we've been behaving as if it's a new thing that nobody has done before us. And I'm glad that Pali, in his presentation, made reference to the South African Special Data Infrastructure Act of 2003. That's how long ago that community discussed this issue. And I would recommend to us, as we look at new ways to think about data, to go and look at the literature of special data infrastructures from the 90s of the special data community that they discussed all this. At that time, they were discussing the concept of custodianship, that this data we are trying to, in their own field, that nobody owns data, but let's assign custodians who will be responsible for different data sets. And I think that's a concept that we should, now that we've discovered them, go and look at that literature and see, can we borrow something from the work they've done in the late 90s and early 2000s? Remember, it's 2003 Act of South Africa, and we worked with that in many countries in Africa. And I think I'm very glad that he brought it up so that we should go back as we look for new ways to manage data for the good of everybody, to look at that custodianship principles that the geospatial community introduced in their discourse back then. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a gentleman.
Thank you. Turgay Ünal, UNICEF Mixed Team. I want to give a couple of examples to support the answers that Edilberto gave about the idea of whether, or the question of whether we need to get rid of household surveys or census, or whether to supplement them with new source of data. We already have a couple of examples from surveys that we collect data on, say, vaccination, child mortality, or education, that are available from other sources like census, vital registrations, or other recording systems. And we know that there are differences. So we are already facing problems when we have data coming from different sources. So if we remove some of these data sources from our use, then we may run to the risk of relying on our analysis on few sources. When we talk about big data, when we talk about data revolution, we should stick to the existing data sources, and also we should be careful about the new data sources, because first we need to see them demonstrate themselves as reliable data sources that will give comparable quality data to compete with the data coming from census and surveys. So in a sense, we are risking ourselves when we start discussing about removing some of the existing data sources and maybe running towards the new data sources. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any last question? Otherwise, I would suggest, because we have the opportunity to come back after coffee and to come back to important issues, will be very exciting. We will have a fishbowl. Those who don't know what a fishbowl is, you will see what a fishbowl is. So we have the important question about the business opportunities, and this is, I think, a crucial question of how all this data, the new sources of data, can lead to new business opportunities. Maybe that's a question, Maurizio, you want to, maybe you have example about how have you seen anything related to business opportunities?
Sí, quizás uno de los mejores ejemplos que podemos poner es lo que hemos hecho con el ejemplo que yo mencionaba en el keynote, de tener la información todos los días de los precios de bienes agrícolas en las grandes plazas de mercado, porque eso le permite a los pequeños productores desde sus fincas conocer qué está pasando con el precio de mercado hoy, para saber, por ejemplo, si despachan alimentos hoy o lo despachan unos días después a la plaza de mercado. Segundo, para eso, ese mecanismo de poder tener en el celular la información, así sean teléfonos no inteligentes, les permite, por ejemplo, a pequeños negocios de alimentos saber cuál es hoy la mejor combinación de alimentos para ellos poder tener mejores posibilidades de rendimientos en su negocio hoy, de acuerdo con los precios del mercado, porque le permite hacer las combinaciones más efectivas de hoy, en vez de dar sopa de papa que está más cara, doy sopa de zanahoria que está mucho más barata, el arroz está más barato, la carne está más barata que el pollo, etcétera, hoy. Entonces le permite esos mecanismos. Lo segundo es, sin duda, uno de los retos más grandes que hay. Yo por eso desde ayer he venido insistiendo, los temas aquí no es solo de cómo se produce la estadística, sino también de cómo se difunde la estadística. Y yo pienso que hay que introducir grandes cambios en cómo se difunden la estadística. No solo desde el gran principio que veíamos hace un momento del Open Data, sino también de que las personas puedan entender esas estadísticas y las puedan incorporar en sus acciones, como el ejemplo que yo ponía del señor, que para él era fundamental tener esa información para sus decisiones. Es un pequeño productor del municipio que mencionaba, pero para él era fundamental. Entonces eso también es muy importante, esa difusión. Y hay que trabajar muchísimo más la cultura estadística. Por eso nosotros tenemos el programa que yo mencionaba ayer, PIN 1, PIN 2, PIN DANE, que es poder llevar las estadísticas desde los niños en el colegio, los niños y las niñas en el colegio, para que aprendan desde pequeños al uso de las estadísticas y cómo la pueden incorporar en su día a día, en la vida.
Thank you so much. I think we come close shortly now, or we come to the end of the first part of this track. I suggest, first of all, please join me in giving applause to our fantastic panel. And thank you so much for being with us. Please come all back, I would say at a quarter past, looking at the organizers, 4:15. Please take a coffee and then come back at 4:15 for an exciting second part, which will be then discussing more the consequences of all the changes that we discussed here in terms of the institution. What needs to change? So please be back at 4:15. Thank you so much.
Sure, that's one question we want to answer. Of national statistical systems to respond to this rapidly changing context that we've been hearing about for the last 2 years, but certainly for the last 1.5 days. So we're going to use a different approach. I want to welcome everybody to come in and gather around. It's a bit like an amphitheater. And let me just ask, how many people have ever used a fishbowl discussion content before? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, 5, 6. Good. 7. Janet. Here's our fishbowl. The fishbowl is transparent. Everybody can see in. You can listen, you can watch those fish swimming around, whatever they do. You can watch it very carefully. But we want to, and this is how a fishbowl works, if you feel at a moment as a member of our audience that you'd like to maybe just challenge what Ricardo has said, you come and sit next to him. And as soon as he's done talking, and we'll make sure that he doesn't talk too long, you have a chance to intervene, to ask a question, to follow up, to contest what he says. And then
would be nice.
And then you can leave that seat for someone else to come in later on. We're going to go through a sequence. I'll introduce our colleagues and go through a sequence with the 5 fishbowl members. And just think of questions you might have. Think of how to jump right in and get involved in the conversation. All right. So just a little bit of appreciation for the role of national statistical offices and national statistical systems. I work with UNFPA, so we've been engaged with national statistical authorities for 45 years around the world. We've probably spent, some estimates take us above $1 billion over those 45 years, supporting mostly population and housing censuses, demographic and health surveys, together with our colleagues from UNICEF, MIX, and also civil and vital registration, a number of other elements to support national statistical systems. So it's kind of interesting that we're here in Cartagena because I just learned that in 1778, the first ever population and housing census took place in this town, and this building was enumerated. And it was a detailed census. They actually counted people and rooms and the types of roof and structure. 1778. That's pretty cool. 13,690 people were enumerated in the city of Cartagena. There was probably no national statistical authority, but there was a driving force at the time, and I understood it had something to do with taxation and keeping the wheels turning in this great city. But anyway, it's more than ironic and very nice to know that we're in the place where the very first ever census took place. And that's one of the things that national statistical systems have always stood on as a platform, as a foundation, is that every 10 years they do the most detailed population and housing census that ever takes place in any country. Now, I'm not going to take too much more time here. I've got a question I'm going to ask for Ricardo to respond to, if you're ready. Sorry? Oh, yeah, okay, yeah. So I'm not going to introduce everybody at once, one at a time. Ricardo himself, I think some of you have heard him speak, right? He's working with Oxfam. He's the head of research there, and he's gonna answer this particular question: how do we minimize the risk of the growing tension, as we've heard in the last few days, the growing tension and mismatch between societal demands, the whole issue of the democratization of data, the demand side, and the official supply that we traditionally know about that national statistical offices provide. Please, Ricardo.
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. So when I was thinking about what to say in this fishbowl session, I was thinking about a prominent member of the Chinese Communist Party, who was asked sometime in the 70s, Xu Enlai, who was asked what he thought about the French Revolution, and he said, like, might be too soon to tell. And I think, we need to. That's one of the risks that we need to avoid. That the data revolution becomes something so messy that we cannot tell what are the implications for the data revolution. And I think that's kind of like, one of the things to avoid that risk that you're mentioning. I think that if we have different actors that are forming, that are part of this very rapidly moving data revolution, we need to find kind of the common ground and the compromise to move together. So in the presentation, the quick presentation I made yesterday morning, I outlined this tension, but I think, I mean, it's a bit more complicated than that, because I can see there are four actors in this data revolution. There's the private sector, who's well ahead the rest of us. We saw in the morning session yesterday, they're producing huge amounts of data. You know, the amount of data that the private sector is collecting and generating goes beyond the imagination of lots of us. And it's going to continue growing. So the private sector is one actor, and it has a lot of power in this data revolution because of the structure of their work. The second actor is the national statistical offices, you know, and they also have power, but their power is more kind of like control of the rules, control of the quality, and things like that. But the national statistical offices run the risk of becoming irrelevant if they don't embrace the change. The third actor are the data scientists, the alternative data scientists. And the power they got is the power of using new methods and understanding what's happening with the new alternative sources of information, you know? Like, I mean, and that's what's growing. And because it's growing, these alternative data scientists control, have some power. And finally, the power of the international organizations and NGOs that you know, are somewhere in between, kind of like, I mean, a national statistical office, and somewhere in between, you know, like, I mean, people that can convene, and that's the power of, say, for instance, Paris 21 or the UN statistical system that can convene and find the common ground, you know. So if we don't understand very clearly who are the actors and who are kind of like the actors of change, so very clearly the private sector and the alternative data scientists are the ones that are driving the change. And in a way, national statistical offices, just because they're sitting on already existing methodologies and ways of doing work, are naturally resisting change. If we don't understand those dynamics, we might just like get into a position where we focus on the tensions instead of focusing on the opportunities. And then the question is, like, given all these dynamics, what are the opportunities? What are the opportunities? And I think that's where it kind of like, say, for instance, what Danny, the Secretary General from Civicus, was mentioning yesterday is like, well, we need to make sure that like all these changes in data availability and methods and like the data revolution serves the purpose of a better world. And that's, I mean, I guess that's why we're here. So in a way, I think we all know that, but it's really telling that we are speaking different languages. That people coming from one area still continues to speak the language of quality control and making sure that we need to follow proper procedures, and other people are talking about, you know, like, I mean, the great opportunities that we have if we're flexible and move fast and things like that. So I think so first, I mean, as with the French Revolution, we need to identify what's the goal, what's the ultimate goal. You know, what's our fraternity? What is it? Fraternity, égalité, fraternité, and so we need to identify what is that vision, and then we need to identify what of these four actors. What's the role of these four actors in that vision? Because what we need to make sure, and that's, say, for instance, an organization like Oxfam needs to be actively involved in this, is that assure that none of these actors go rogue. Because, and I'm going to be very blunt here, I mean, my personal concern is that, say, for instance, given the power that the private sector has by the amount of data they're generating, I mean, we heard like all the fantastic things they're trying to do, but what if one day some of them want to go rogue? You know, what if one day they decide that they control that data and they want to sell it, or they want to do things other than the common good? So I think that's where the risk lies. But the opportunity lies in the fact that, like, I mean, I think like what the last couple of days have shown is that we have a common vision. How do we use this data revolution for the betterment of everyone, especially the most marginalized? And once we agree on that, then we have to identify what's the role of each one of us in that dynamic.
Excellent. Okay. Anybody would like to jump right in here and challenge this? He's talking about a big tension. I mean, it sounds almost really threatening, yet at the same time starts to spell out some of the potential opportunities. The 4 different major actor groups, also a very important part of the landscape. Anybody like to challenge this, add something to this discussion right now? Yeah, come on into the circle. En español? Which meant?
Me pusieron en la pecera finalmente. Sí, no, yo creo que quiero hacer algún comentario sobre lo que dijo Ricardo. Él habló de que en las oficinas nacionales de estadística hay resistencia al cambio. No niego que pueda haberla, como en todas las instituciones, pero en todas las instituciones las hay. Es decir, no en la Oficina Nacional de Estadística. Las hay en las empresas que se niegan a dar información, las hay en las clases altas que no le abren a los entrevistadores, las hay en las instituciones públicas diversas que realmente no le dan la debida importancia a la estadística. O sea, hay mucha resistencia al cambio, pero en cuanto a lo que es la producción y difusión de datos para el desarrollo, las oficinas nacionales de estadística están a la vanguardia. Lo que es la producción y difusión de datos para la toma de decisiones, para las políticas públicas y para las medidas de gobierno y para los programas de gobierno e incluso para el sector privado, porque todos los ámbitos del sector privado la buscan desesperadamente, que cuándo va a estar el censo, que cuándo va a estar la encuesta, que cuándo esto, que cuándo lo otro. Siempre están necesitando los datos de la Oficina Nacional de Estadística, por algo será. Gracias.
Thank you very much. Could you just introduce yourself?
Pablo Tactuc, director de la Oficina Nacional de Estadística de la República Dominicana.
You have 60 seconds to respond to this.
Yo creo que las oficinas nacionales de estadísticas en verdad tienen un rol muy relevante aún y estoy de acuerdo con lo que dices, pero eso sucede en algunos países y en algunas regiones. Hay otras regiones donde la capacidad estadística va decayendo, ¿no? O sea, el caso de África, ¿no? donde la capacidad estadística, o Bolivia, ¿no? dice Werner. Es decir, digamos, la capacidad de las oficinas nacionales de estadística varía mucho a través del mundo y en algunos momentos, o sea, hay menos encuestas de hogares ahora en África que las que había hace 15 años, ¿no? ¿Por qué es eso? Y la pregunta es, ¿cómo podemos asegurarnos de que, digamos, toda esa generación de base de datos pueda informar los procesos de desarrollo, no solo en los países que tienen una capacidad estadística fuerte, sino en los países, sobre todo en los países que tienen una capacidad estadística débil?
Ricardo, thank you. One small comment, I want to then pass on to Dr. Nini, but go ahead.
It's kind of a large comment, if you allow me.
You'll have a minute. And was it specifically related to this?
Yeah, I think it's very related to what I would like to say about this. So if I can, take the turn now.
Take your turn now. 3 minutes.
Okay.
Anybody who wants to... Let me first... Can I introduce you first? Or would you like to introduce yourself? Go ahead.
Can introduce myself. Well, I'm Werner Hernani Limarino. I'm the director of Fundacionado, which is a think tank in Bolivia. More importantly, I'm a representative of an initiative, a global initiative called the Southern Voice, which is it's a group of 48 think tanks in Latin America, Africa, and Asia, who care about development and who want to close 2 gaps. One is the knowledge gap, and the other is the voice gap. Voice. And I agree with your second point that there are a lot of gaps in the world. There's a lot of income inequality. There's a lot of inequality in development, but there's a lot of inequality in knowledge. And data is a fundamental part in the production of knowledge. And I agree with what you're saying. The Southern Boys have conducted research in 22 countries in the impact of the Millennium Development Goals on the quality of the statistics that were produced by the NS office. And the results are very mixed. There are very nice experience, which I'm sure the Dominican Republic may be one of them. For sure, Danny in Colombia is a great example of where a national statistical office, what a national statistical office should do, but there are very bad examples too. And unfortunately, I have to say that Bolivia is kind of that example. And just to highlight, just to give you an example of why is this a problem in Bolivia. In Bolivia, the law that sets the framework for the national statistics system is older than me. It was created in 1976. You can imagine how inadequate is that kind of framework for the type of things we were talking to in these 2 days. And how can you produce quality statistics with that legal framework? A second example of why the Bolivian case is a failure. You have produced 9 reports in 15 years, which is great. And you have followed the 8 goals and 25 targets. But the problem is that none of these targets was known by the population. We conduct interviews to 45 high-level officials. And we ask themselves whether they have read the report, and half of them were not aware that the report was published.
Okay.
The third point is that the report was not produced by the National Statistical Office. It was produced by a separate branch of the government, which made the statistics not official, which made that none of these statistics that was produced to monitor and evaluate the MDGs was used in the National Statistical, in the National Development Plan. None of them. None of the indicators that were produced for the MDGs were used in national development plans. So this is a failure, and we should be aware that opportunities are not always taken by the governments. Opportunities are not always taken by the National Statistical Office. And I think because as knowledge, as quality of education, quality data is very hard to produce. And you cannot take an input, a production function approach. You cannot say, for producing good statistics, you need human capital, you need good technology, you need this type of software. It's much more complicated, because what you need to produce good statistics is you need the people to have incentives to demand good statistics, and the people to have incentives to produce good statistics. And sometimes countries, and many countries, especially low-income countries such as mine, are trapped in a low quality, low demand, low supply circle. And my question would be for every one of you, how do you overcome that circle?
Wow, that's quite a, I'm sorry to say, but quite a depressing scenario that you paint there. And actually, that's exactly what this session is designed to be geared towards, is what specific areas can we actually strengthen capacity of national statistical systems in order to manage this tension, not to stand alone on, and I referred to the comment at the beginning of this morning on tired old official data, but not to stand alone on that foot, but to really plant your feet on both sides of the supply and the demand, and build capacity to interpret and utilize, not just in statistical system itself, but amongst the population at large. And just wondering if anybody has, would like to jump in and please, come on in and join us for just a minute. And I hope with some very positive, constructive, more optimistic, forward-looking suggestions. Take a seat right next to Werner. Or, yeah, this is fine.
Yeah. And I'm Eva Jespersen, Human Development Report Office, but also part of this statistical revolutionary community. And one of my pets or peeves in the expert group has really been the need to ensure that traditional academic scientific research takes place and that we don't just pull data from the sky and start making analysis and conclusion from them. And what I'm sort of sensing in this discussion is that maybe we should look towards national statistical offices and have them strengthen their capacity or outreach to some of the traditional scientific areas like anthropology, like sociology, not for them to do the research, but to act as the gateway to the academic or the think tank community to ensure that they also become part of that sort of access to new and big data that national statistical offices eventually will have because they will have listened to us, but also for them to ensure that this data is made available to those who actually can draw up hypotheses and test theories and use the data. So that's where I
Very nice comment. And this I mean, it's about partnerships, isn't it? And it's really looking beyond the boundaries of our own myopic little statistical organization and looking at strengthening partnerships that can feed many of these discussions that we're having. You're jumping in now, Johannes.
If I may, this is really interesting. And it seems that we say, it seems to suggest that statistical office operate in a completely free environment. No straitjacket, they can do what they want, and they may want not to change. I mean, let's be also honest why the situation is maybe as challenging as it is, as we described it. I mean, we have good reports about statistical capacity situation in Africa. The Center for Global Development report, Center for Global Development, just a year ago with a couple of African institutions produced a report. And in terms of the analysis why the situation is as it is, and we should be honest to ourselves, is also because, first of all, the national governments didn't pay that much attention to their national statistical offices. They are often a couple of people, understaffed, under-resourced, and then you ask them, do change to big data just tomorrow. Why don't you use the big data?
Tomorrow.
Secondly, the international community, and then there are some representatives of important organizations here in this room, I don't look at anybody specifically, that may be driving and collect statistics in countries that is deeply detrimental to strengthen national capacities. Well, we know all these stories about on Monday, you have a national statistical office in one country and there's somebody from an important international organization coming, can you please collect data on health issues? Okay, then they go out, collect the data. Okay. Wednesday, there is another important, and then it's about gender issues and then about something else. So all the statistical office staff will be in the field collecting data, nobody stays behind. So I think we should be also honest to ourselves. In terms of embracing this data revolution, also means change at the national level, but also means change at the international level and in terms of coordination. So I really plea for not only blaming national statistical offices for being resistant to change, and I'm sitting here next, and I give the floor now to Lina, because she works for a fantastic national statistical office that already embraces change. So Lina, please.
Yeah. Yes, just to continue on with our discussion, I mentioned this morning that in the Philippines, the statistical system is undergoing a transformation, and that is because of the passage of the Republic Act called Philippine Statistical Act of 2013. And this is merging formerly 4 agencies, National Statistical Coordination Board, in charge with coordination mechanisms, Bureau of Agriculture Statistics, in charge with agriculture, Bureau of Labor and Employment Statistics on labor and employment, and of course, the biggest one, which is the National Statistics Office. So you can say that we should be undergoing a cultural shift. And we have these leadership institutes with the help of the World Bank, wherein, we are being taught collaborative negotiation skills, competency skills. Imagine merging 4,000 personnel and with different cultures, because coming from different agencies in the first place. So there should be a cultural revolution, if I can use that word. And apart from that, in terms of the intervention earlier, about the human development. Included in that Statistical Act is the creation of the Philippine Statistical Research and Training Institute. This will be our partner, you know, in transforming all the inputs, all the data that have been collected by the Philippine Statistical Authority into the kind of research. What would be the kind of improvements, refinements in the methodologies that should be done so that the data, the information don't just lay there, but
Absolutely.
they will be transformed into how can their methodologies be refined. There could be modeling and many other things that can be done by this particular research and training institute. And we are a partner, and we do collaborative activity with this Philippine Statistical Research and Training Institute.
Thanks.
So
Okay.
we are into change.
Good.
We are not resistant.
Positive, constructive. That's what we needed. We were going deeper and deeper. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great segue that I can build upon. My name is Gavin Starks. I run the Open Data Institute. I think our view here is that this really needs to engage everybody. And it isn't a question that research is being done without the researchers. Actually, research needs to change. We need to open up our primary research at source and not gate it through the publication systems that we currently have. Fundamentally, peer review needs to shift. The raw data needs to be published as part of all research. That's quite a bold statement. But I think it is mandatory. Similarly, governments are changing at different paces. But the pattern that we see is also commercial interests are here already, and they have much more investment. So they are getting the data first.
Yeah.
So what do we need to do in order to encourage companies to open up their data? And there's many different ways of doing this. Some of the patterns we've seen are encouraging, they're carrot approaches. There's innovation. We've got startups that are being funded that are helping companies build new products and services using open data.
Yeah.
We see huge efficiencies in the mix. The narrative around transparency and open data, I think, is well worn now, but we really see the major benefits coming from efficiencies and innovation. But one of the pieces that we feel that is really missing here is investment in data literacy. And the kind of questions that we're asking in the UK and in discussion at the moment, we have 17,000 people in the UK who self-identify as policymakers. How do we train 17,000 people
How to use.
in data literacy now? And how do we keep them current in all of the questions and ethical questions and moral questions that will arise as we unlock more and more data, whether that's personal data, whether it's data that is shared around healthcare, or whether it is open data? We have a huge step change here, and it's being driven very much actually by the commercial world. If you imagine, what does the world look like in 10, 20 years from now, where there will be more sensors than people, that there will be real-time Earth observation down to 2-meter resolution of the whole Earth? What do we do with those kind of data sets? And how do we construct policy? And how do we enable our policymakers, our national institutes, our researchers to adapt at internet speed? Now, the pace of change here is not going to slow down. And we're already too slow in our reaction of policy to technological change. And the reaction quite often initially is fear. We should stop doing something. Stopping doing something isn't the solution.
So Gavin, you've painted again, you come back to data literacy. We're identifying issues and challenges. What we'd love to have, and I'm so happy to have so many folks who represent national bodies, but how can we actually strengthen that capacity? We're identifying challenges. We need more solutions. Ricardo, you wanted the floor. If you have a solution.
No, but I just wanted to kind of ask a question, because I mean, it's great to see examples of change, and I think the question we need to be asking ourselves is like, what is driving that change? What is making that change possible in the Philippines context? And then contrast it to situations where change is not happening. Say, for instance, it's been mentioned the Tanzanian data bill that's making illegal and is criminalizing the use of non-official statistics. So that's where change is not happening at all. So we have those extremes, and we have to recognize that there's like all that variation in the change. And I think that this fora should kind of actually explore what's driving change, what's driving positive change, learn from that, and then kind of like, I mean, inform, you know, because otherwise change is going to be thrown upon us. And
it is being thrown upon us. It is
being thrown upon us, and we just need to adapt and then make the most of it. So it's really important to see these successful examples of change.
Yeah, go ahead, Plenary.
I'd like to respond very quickly to that. Do you know that our president of the Philippines is a very heavy user of statistics? And right now, there is this Freedom of Information Act, which is now in the House of Congress and the Senate, and it is for endorsement to the office of the president. And I am very sure that the president, when it comes to his office, he will just sign it. Excellent. And it will be one way, you know, of sharing. And he is also, he's spearheading his office, executive office, through his executive secretary, has launched the Open Data Initiative for the Philippines. And we are a part of that Open Data Initiative.
Watch this space. We're going to watch carefully. Werner, you were demanding the mic.
Yeah, just
anybody else wants to join, please do feel free. Come on in. We've got spaces here, and we can move someone else if you've got a comment. So Werner, go ahead, please.
I think Ricardo asked the right question, which is, what will drive change?
What will drive change?
Yeah, and you were posing that data literacy for policymakers might be one driving. But I believe that at the end, at least I come from a developing country. I know that things in England are much more different, but in my country, policies are just about politics. The influence of knowledge, of research, of data, of information on policy making is just marginal. In my country, in my context, I don't want to generalize. So I think the real change would come with informed societies. Yeah. And data literacy is not important, not only for policymakers, but for the society at large, because at the end, I think the society is going to be the main driver of change.
Okay, thanks. But Gavin.
Again, just to build on that, policymakers are one category of people that we train. We train lawyers, we train journalists, we train everyone, really. And our question is, if we can embed open data in policy, and one of the drivers that we're looking at is embedding the publishing of open data in procurement. So this has already happened with the Gates Foundation and the Ford Foundation mandating the production of open data as part of grant awards. We're working on embedding it into government procurement in the UK. So if you're a company supplying to the government, you have to publish open data, not personal data, not national security information, that's not open data, but everything else that should be open data should be published. And that enables everybody to engage. Anybody who has a specific interest in whether it's farming or whether it's health policy, everybody who's involved in that world can get engaged. And actually the research community can benefit massively from that through better use of social tools, whether it's a Kickstarter campaign to help fund a piece of research, or whether it's a citizen science project helping with the actual analytics.
Gavin, thank you very much. Eva, you wanted to give one comment, then we're going to go to Myanmar.
Just, I mean, in a way, I think also this group, wider group, also needs to maybe become better at showing examples where official and new data have been used in unison or reinforced each other, rather than this sort of antagonistic sort of trend that we are onto now, because the way, and that's the Tanzania example, unless you can also convince policymakers that it is safe or informative to use it, and we can only do that by showing examples of an analysis that becomes better because we draw on more and different sources.
Okay. Good point. Thank you very much. Dr. Nini, if I can ask you, you all know that in Myanmar they've just completed, it's probably one of the countries that's completed one of the largest censuses in the last few years, and not an easy one, very complicated, with plenty of political elements built into very sound technical work. I'd like to ask you specifically, now you've heard this, what specific kinds of capacities do you think, as a director of the population division within the National Statistical Office, what specific, in your own work plan in the next 2 years, what would be your dream in terms of strengthening the capacity of NSO in Myanmar?
Well, Myanmar situation is because we haven't had a census for 30 years, so the capacity of the, our Department of Population is about 4 years ago when we decided, the government decided that we are going to have a census. The capacity of our office is, very low because during the 30 years, all the old staff who have conducted previous census, they have retired, and when we junior staff took over, then we have no experience at all. But during the last 4 years, because the government has the political will, and we office has the commitment and decided that the census must be successful. So during the last 4 years, we try to build our capacity, and with the help of the, many other organizations like UNFPA and many organizations help us to develop our capacity. And now that we have conducted this census last year, and only after 1 year after the data collection, we are going to release the main result next month. So during the, so it is not only the future, we already developed our capacity during the last 2 or 3 years. So what I mean is that the statistical office, if they have the, commitment and will to change the office, we can, because we started from scratch. And now we will have a lot of, information. And we try our best during the last 3 years. So if we decided to develop our capacity, we can do it. So my answer is that if the, statistical office can, if they decide to change, they can do it. But the more important thing is that, if now that what I'm talking about the census is that it is a traditional, but what this data festival is talking about is a more advanced method. But during in the next 2 years, if we want to catch up with the new technology, we can do that. But first, there must be political will, and unless we are, the policymaker, they change their mind, and it will be difficult. So I think what we can do is that, maybe like you said that we should also have the, data literature for the policymakers also, so that they will realize that traditional, census survey data may not be enough, and we need to change.
All right, great. Your comment reminds me a little bit of, and how many people remember John Maynard Keynes, 1937, the one comment that we've been laughing about for 60-odd years. You remember that statement he made in 1937? He said, there's nothing, absolutely nothing that government hates more than being informed, because it makes arriving at decisions so much more difficult. And I'm reminded of that again and again and again. Data is power. And another one, there's 3 sides to every story. Not 2 sides to a coin, 3 sides to a story. Yours, mine, and the facts. So we all manipulate around that, but how often do we really get to the truth? could you see some room in terms of the data literacy for the policymakers in Myanmar? I mean, specifically, do you think that there could be some orientation to further build confidence and competence in using not only traditional, but also start the engagement on the new forms of data and also on a citizen engagement discussion as well? Could you see that evolving now with the experience of the census behind you and looking forward?
Right now, I cannot tell that. I cannot see because right now the policymakers they are only involved in the traditional data, and they haven't got the idea of that new idea. So I think it will be, if we can, after maybe 2 years, that they will realize that census and survey data may not be enough, and then they will change their mind.
Everybody in the room stands ready to support you. You're next. En
español, sí. Bueno, yo tenía una pregunta de acuerdo a lo que usted habló, que en cierta forma ya me la contestó la señora acá, y era cómo impulsar a los gobiernos de estadísticas pobres para crear datos más precisos y abiertos a otros, aceptando también la participación externa, porque pues yo oigo que hablan de que ellos no lo hacen, pero ¿cómo se puede impulsar a estos gobiernos para que ciertamente lo hagan, para evitar ese muro existente en el momento? Es una pregunta que me hago, ¿cómo han pensado lograrlo?
Yo vengo trabajando 9 años en Bolivia, intentando diferentes alternativas, y declaro públicamente que he fracasado en todas ellas. No tengo una respuesta. Hemos intentado, siguiendo una iniciativa de Filipinas, en Filipinas hay una iniciativa muy interesante que para mí es una de las mejores en el mundo, que se llama el Community Based Monitoring System, que es entrenamiento a las comunidades para que ellas mismas recojan información sobre sus propias comunidades, censos, sobre las dimensiones que ellos juzgan son las que quieren alcanzar y mejorar. Y es una iniciativa en Filipinas fenomenal, a mí me parece espectacular. Es un panel de datos para muchísimas comunidades. Palawan creo que tiene 10 años de esta iniciativa. Y nosotros hemos intentado replicarla y hemos sido exitosos en hacer esto en algunas comunidades. La respuesta del gobierno ante esto ha sido muy negativa, ¿no? Hemos creado demasiado antagonismo tratando de generar información desde un centro de investigación. Hemos intentado aliarnos con el gobierno para generar encuestas de hogares, ver cuáles eran las debilidades, cuáles eran las formas en las que había que mejorar. Y hemos sido muy exitosos a un comienzo, ¿no? Haciendo un diagnóstico de todo lo que se tenía que hacer, pero hemos sido después del cambio de personas, muy poco exitosos al final, ¿no? Porque no ha sido sostenible. Entonces, yo creo que hay que intentar de todas las maneras, pero al final, de nuevo, como decía Johannes, yo no encuentro que esto sea tema de una persona. No creo que esto sea tema de una institución, de un think tank menos. Yo creo que es una decisión de la sociedad, ¿no? Y que por eso es importante educar a la sociedad y hacer activismo de datos, haciendo ver a la sociedad que los datos son poder, que la información es poder, y que eso permite mayor priorización de los beneficios que uno como población quiere recibir de su gobierno. Eso permite mayor demanda social por cosas que uno quiere recibir, mayor accountability también, mayor transparencia, y eso es algo necesario. Entonces, yo tiendo a pensar que es más importante promover la demanda que la oferta, ¿no?
That's a very interesting end point. Thanks, Werner. Klaus.
Hello, my name is Klaus Johansson from UNICEF Data Analytics, and I'm as old as the Bolivian statistical legal framework, so that this discussion makes me feel old. On capacity building and sort of the relationship with the, so with the DHS and mixed surveys that we support, in the last, I think we've seen sort of a sea change in availability and sort of a global picture on some of these things, like health and education data out of that. But I think we've learned some lessons along the way in terms of making that work in a way that supports capacity building and doesn't work against that. I think we could do better on that. That's I think we can recognize. But that has, I think that work taught us, though, I think there's in terms of capacity of statistical systems, it's necessarily very correlated with the capacity of the government. Fundamentally, a good sort of statistical system is closely correlated with good governance in general, right? And that's something you can achieve at lower levels of income, but we know from the research that it's really a challenge in a low-income country. I think we have to recognize the challenges that countries at different levels of development face and be realistic in what we can achieve. Now, and learn from the good examples in low-income settings. If you look at countries in Africa, as the Center for Global Development studies show, there's large discrepancies, right? But the question to me, as we now face this change, do we see anything that fundamentally will change this picture in what's coming up? I would argue that really there isn't. There's no, while we can sort of lower the cost of the investment that we need to make in this, it doesn't fundamentally change that you need to have good governance to have good statistics. And I think that's a catch-22. Could, of course, good informed decisions based on data could potentially actually lead to better governance. But I think it's, you cannot talk about the statistical system in isolation from the broader picture in terms of income and in terms of the government's general competency. And on data literacy, recently I heard a minister of health in a country in Africa declare that they were going to reduce mortality by half in the next 6 months. Of course, notwithstanding the practical limitations of being able to achieve that, anybody who knows about measuring that knows that even if they did achieve it, there's no way you could actually measure that. So I think we do have to make a big investment in data literacy as well. So I wanted to raise that.
Plus, in UNICEF and also with Macro and DHS, would you see yourself ultimately putting yourself out of business, that national statistical offices, through some sort of routine and periodic intercensal process, would no longer need a mix or DHS, that it couldn't, and we saw it happen in Vietnam, where they do a 15% sample or a 3% sample every year, and they've actually replaced DHS. Is that something that UNICEF would advocate for? And because that's part of strengthening national capacity, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think, that's sort of the definition of capacity building, that you would eventually see yourself facing out of that. I do think you would need to transition. I think one positive impact of having these as programs is that we have much more standardization on some of these indicators in our program countries than in rich countries. So as we talk about the
Huh? They did, I know, much to the dismay of National Statistical Office. But go ahead.
That we do see more standardization in terms of this, right? I think there's still going to be the need for sort of global technical support, but in terms of having, and now we looked at, for example, disability, right? And how that's actually captured in censuses and surveys, and 193 countries do it in 193 different ways. Clearly, it would be some benefit to have some global coordination of different elements of surveys. And of course, even the most sophisticated countries like Sweden, who don't do a census anymore, they do completely register-based approach to population. They still do household surveys, right? So it's not a question of household surveys versus, it's saying that
it's what works.
More and more we need to standardize the way we approach these data, because you both get comparable data but also solid methodologies.
Yeah.
If you share that sort of methodological development, ultimately though countries should of course collect this data totally independently.
Okay. Yeah. Good, thanks. Another question here and a question here, and other people who may want to move in. I see at least one empty seat, so please feel free. Over to you.
Sí, gracias. Realmente estos encuentros son excelentes porque podemos ver cuáles son los retos del futuro y cuáles son las ideas novedosas que se están presentando para mejorar las estadísticas, que por supuesto tienen que ser maduradas y desarrolladas. Y yo creo que eso es sumamente positivo y debemos estar abiertos a esos cambios que vienen inevitablemente. Y sobre todo a todo lo que es el uso de la tecnología, etc. Hay algo, muy importante que en este encuentro no lo he oído destacar suficientemente. La disponibilidad de datos actualmente se ha multiplicado por una cantidad enorme con respecto a hace 10 años. Eso lo vivimos en todas las oficinas nacionales de estadística y lo viven todos los investigadores. Ellos lo saben, porque inclusive están en los sitios web de todas partes. Entonces, eso es un fenómeno evidente. Hay una disponibilidad de datos muchísimo mayor. Ahora, ¿qué sucede? Por la demanda que hay de la planificación pública, etcétera, se producen cada vez más datos, pero de hecho no se usan con todo el potencial con que deberían usarse. Se usan insuficientemente. Se produce cada vez más, pero se utilizan en forma limitada, muy limitada, los datos. Y yo creo que inclusive las agencias internacionales deben estar preocupadas para que los países usen los datos más profundamente, porque esto es una verdadera revolución de los datos. Utilizar los datos que existen, empezando por ahí, ya eso es una revolución de los datos. Entonces vamos a propiciar que esa revolución de los datos, que es la más fácil de solucionar, porque lo que se trata es de propiciar mayor capacitación, entrenamiento en el uso de los datos, etcétera, a distintos sectores, incluso a instituciones públicas diversas, de manera que estos datos se usen cada vez más.
Thank you so much. I just want to repeat that because we don't think it's revolutionary to actually use the information we already have more effectively. And that is truly revolutionary. We continue to collect, and still the capacity to utilize is the Achilles tendon of this whole process. You're breaking in now, you want to just bust in, you got to come in the fishbowl, or we cannot talk. But I'm giving the floor to in the meantime, and maybe you could switch here. I'll give the floor to the UNFPA representative in Myanmar, Janet Jackson.
Thank you. I want to pick up one of your initial reference to tensions, and I think we're hearing an awful lot about the tensions and some of the complexities associated with the point, I think, that has just been made, which is that data is there, but it's not accessible in a way that is useful, it's not interpreted, and it actually isn't necessarily available. It's there, but not necessarily available or accessible. And when we're looking at, I agree that I certainly wouldn't start with the national policymakers in terms of capacity building, though that is important. If we really want to revolutionize change and bring about change, data is power, and power is not given, it has to be seized. And I think there are different ways in which it can be seized, but the driving force for that is going to be through the communities, through groups, community leader groups, and them understanding data. That's one set of people. The other set of people is the local level, really looking at governance issues and accountability, the local level planners. If they exist, they don't exist, and that's one of the problems. Statistical institutions are often national institutions, and people are given in the districts and at the local level the task of looking after and interpreting data, but they don't know where to begin. Certainly as UNFPA, we've worked through many countries, and I've seen myself many countries where recent census data is still not being used, let alone available in some of the districts, and they're sometimes using 10, 20-year-old data. So I think there's a lot of capacity to be built in at the local level, so that people understand the local administration knows, the local leaders know, and know how to claim their rights and claim power, and use those mechanisms and those means to try and then put pressure for change and being much more responsive.
Thanks very much. We recall from the earlier session how Polly himself, the South African statistic, was jumping on the plane to go speak to the parliamentarians. Certainly a common, very powerful relationship between national statistical authorities and the populace at large. But that's national level. So I think your point, Janet, is also very well taken. You have the equivalent of parliamentarians at every level, all the way down to the household with a husband and a wife. And I want to get, decentralization and data literacy applies across every single level of society. So you have the floor. You want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Patricia Rojas. I'm a PhD student from Javeriana University in engineering. And I think one of the points I want to stress with respect to your question is that I think that there is a misconception in what is statistics and how people embrace it or just like runs away of statistics because it's like ugly, difficult, and maybe that's what's the common concept. If you ask a question to a little kid, what is statistics? What he will answer, I don't know, right? So if you don't know anything, how would you love it, right? So I think that's one of the points that policymakers and maybe people who is here that have a way to influence other institutions could help to make a change. The other big point that I have seen now in the PhD after working 10 years for other companies is that people love to work isolated and looks like they feel very proud because they are the only people who knows concept X, right? So if we don't share what we know, it would be very difficult to make the change. What I mean with that is that, for instance, the scientifics, they usually work with them, and the people who are in the enterprises, like the non-governments, they also work between them. And then it's really difficult because this is a problem complex that needs a complex solution, which should involve many different type of knowledge and also capabilities, right? So, well, this is one point. Another solution, easy one, is quickly to implement is that the government now in Colombia is doing really an effort to give lots of scholarships, right? Especially with the royalties that unfortunately now are not so generous because of the prices. But for instance, I'm one of those examples. I get a scholarship, but there were no rules for me in what to apply my knowledge, right? I decided to do something for society, but I could have decided to do something for capitalism, right? And then it's not really very intelligent the way the scholarships are given.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, very good point. Now listen, the discussion's going very well, but I'm just looking at the time, and I'm going to have about 15 more minutes in the fishbowl. I'm going to ask Janet to leave and leave a seat. I'm going to give you the microphone. And if anybody else wants to jump in, we've got a couple other seats here. We're going to have 15 more minutes before we start to wind down. Over to you.
Hi, I am Enrique Peláez, the president of Latin American Population Association. I was listening to the presentation of, your name was? Ricardo. He talked about 4 actors. I think you forgot the main actor, that is the people. For example, Bruce says that data is power. John Lennon says that power to the people. So we can give data to the people, and the people will be power.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important a key issue is to educate people, to use data, to demand rights, to evaluate the achievement of their rights. And I think if we educate people, the people will support policymakers that will support the importance of resources for National Statistics Office. I think that is a key issue that we don't have to forget the people in this process.
Thank you so much. an immediate response, then I'm going to ask Johannes. He wanted just to move us forward a bit.
I mean, you're right that I didn't include people, but that was on purpose because, I mean, and that relates to a lot of the points that were made. So I mentioned those 4 actors because this is the state of play right now. And I agree that the aspiration should be exactly that. And I think the session yesterday on accountability led by Civicus was exactly like that. And that's why I agree completely with what Werner said, that, I mean, we probably should focus more on demand than use. Because at the end, what I think we could do, what the data revolution should mean, is that we're using all this deluge, this increased amount of data for accountability purposes, for governance purposes. So we break that correlation that we see now between income and governance that Klaus mentioned. You know, because like if we are able to use the increased number of information to improve governance and accountability and make people hold the powers that be to account, then we can claim that the data revolution has been successful.
Okay.
You know, empowering people through data. And then, I mean, I don't know if that exists, you know, data activism, if such a term exists. You mention it, but like, I don't know if you invented that or it's something that exists. But we're a long way from that, you know, but like, I think, I agree that that's where we need to be, but we're not there yet.
Not there yet. Okay. Over to Jonas. You know, we hear democratization of data, we hear the data revolution, but I mean, it's still not, it's not taking root in real engagement. So we're looking for not just different rhetoric, we need action. You know, and what we're trying to look for here, I think, is at country level, specific examples, and we've heard a few. We've heard some hesitation in some country contexts, we've heard some much more progressive language in some. We're not there. You know, there's no 2 countries are anywhere near the same on this, you know, on this continuum. Johannes.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to follow up on what you said earlier on and to bring in some positive thoughts and also to come back to the actors that you mentioned. And let's step back. I mean, we talk about the data revolution since 2 years or so. It's exactly since 2 years that we had this publication by Homi Karas, the high-level panel report, and he was the lead author, and he just throwed it in, let's do a data revolution, and let's create a global partnership on development data. And it's all started from that, and I had a chance to ask him, what did you mean by data revolution? He said, I have no idea, you find it out. So I think, I mean, let's step back. I mean, these 2 years have been, I mean, I think what I learned is bringing in different people at Earth and to start to talk to each other. It's already a start to something better. Yeah. Now we have had a lot of different data drinks, data playgrounds, data festivals, data whatever. And you can see even the Cartagena Data Festival, where we have a couple of National Statistical Office representatives, where we have people from civil society, where we have people from the private sector. And we start at least to talk to each other, to start understanding the language and the challenges each of us had in his little corner. And I think this is a big achievement. This is a big achievement, and we should celebrate this. We all, and we will be hopefully tonight. No, but I also wanted, I mean, I think this is a fantastic discussion, and I think we have to digest this a little bit. But I wanted, because we are running a little bit out of time, also to make the link to the more global international debate. And all this debate about the data revolution is framed under the SDGs and also the current talks about the global partnership on development data that we might be seeing in the future. So I wanted to open the floor a little bit. If we would create a global partnership, and we all know we want to strengthen capacity at the national level, we want data literacy and strengthen all these kind of things. What would you think? What does the audience think? What do we need in terms of a global partnership? Because sometimes partnership becomes a buzzword for solving everything. You just create another global partnership and things will be solved automatically. Well, we all know it's not really the truth. But as we have this political momentum, we are going to Addis, and the US government is ready to make an important plea also from the political level. We have the political momentum now, and many other governments might associate. So what do we want? I mean, in terms of what do we want with this global partnership to do? So maybe if we can have a few ideas about this, that would be great.
Okay, how we'll organize that is one person's already come into the fishbowl. He's swimming around. We're going to take his comment. If anybody else would like to join, also with a specific response to what Johannes has put on the table, we'll do that. Maybe we can create some more chairs if need be. And then we're going to do a 60-second snapshot from each of the original panel members to kind of wrap up. And we're going to wind down, if we can, a little bit early, 5:30, 5:45 at the latest, so that you have time to go freshen up before we start to celebrate as we all want to do. So over to you.
Sure, thanks. Mark from Restless Development, the youth-led development agency. I just wanted to come in on 2 quick points, one of which hopefully touches comes across a bit of an answer to you, Johannes. I think first was really, we've heard a lot about data literacy, about strengthening citizen and community engagement as a critical part of sort of getting this virtuous circle going to avoid the kind of dynamic we heard, the negative circle or spiral. I think I sort of just wanted to emphasize and agree entirely with what Janet from UNFPA just said a minute ago about the importance of community involvement in that and marginalized people. And obviously, you know, we think that that young people are potentially some of those sort of data revolutionaries who can be a key part of that citizen engagement. Okay. The second point, I guess, was just to, I think the distinction that Ricardo made right at the beginning of the 4 different actors, or 5, was a really important one and can hopefully move us forward a little bit in terms of coming up with some of those concrete solutions. In terms of a global partnership for data, I suppose one logical implication, I think, of what I've heard today is that if we're going to do more than just have a data evolution, if we're going to do more than just tweak and try and improve national statistics systems with all of the inherent challenges which we heard from, I think, Klaus from UNICEF, then it strikes me the answer lies in a multi-stakeholder approach to this. And in trying to, once we understand what the strengths and differences of opinion are, of trying to bring together those strengths from the 4 actors, acknowledging the tensions and differences where they lie. Yeah. And one way to do that would seem to me to be looking at something like, I don't know what we'd call them, but national data hubs, for example, where we tap into some of this sort of emerging data philanthropy from the private sector and tap into those strengths, but also headed up by official national statistics and still leaving that mandate very clear and focused, but pull in citizen engagement, citizen-generated data, and start to try and get that virtuous circle going. So that seems to me is one sort of logical entry point where a global partnership can make a real difference.
Excellent, good. So from community level all the way up to the global partnerships. Now it's just, we're testing the water in the whole audience now. On the global partnership going forward, keeping a concerted momentum forward, any thoughts on how that partnership might work? Who should be engaged and how it would best operate? And I look around the entire room now. If anybody would like to step up. Well, you're already in the circle. Please, go ahead.
What I think is very personal is that what you are trying to do is, mejor en español, que se trata de un desarrollo humano global de los gobiernos, y los gobiernos que son más abiertos van a lograr un mayor desarrollo y progreso debido a sus datos que están usando. Entonces, estos gobiernos indirectamente van a hacer una presión para los gobiernos que no logran un buen desarrollo porque no tienen acceso a los datos o no los tienen o no permiten que otros tengan acceso a ellos. Entonces, en un mundo globalizado, yo creo que la presión de los países que logran un mayor desarrollo por la buena utilización de los datos, pues van a hacer una presión y de allí se pueden pegar los miembros de los otros países para mostrar, bueno, aquí lograron esto, ¿qué está pasando con nosotros? Entonces, yo creo que hay simplemente que aprovechar lo que los otros lograron de los países abiertos para tratar de mostrarlo en los países que no son abiertos y lograr que estos se abran. No sé si realmente se logre.
Thank you very much. All right, any other thoughts then on the global partnership? You've spoken once, I'm just looking for, go ahead, please. And then 60 seconds for each original panelist, so start thinking of your wrap-up thought.
the takeaway message that we want. The real action-oriented next steps would be very welcome. But please.
I think a quick win could be volunteering. People volunteering for a common goal. For instance, in the case of maybe a not very hard or strength statistical institution, if people from the strongest ones will go and volunteer in the others and they work together, there could be starting a change.
Okay. So we see that both within countries, but also South-South. We see triangular. We've already had, I've heard discussions in the quarters about exchanges between countries, not only in this region, but between regions as well. That could be part of also a larger global partnership. Are you going to take the floor and give us your final comments, Lena?
Well, maybe Johannes will consider this good news because the highest policy-making body on statistical matters in the Philippines is what we call the Statistical Board. Philippine Statistical PSA Board. And just in November 21st of last year, the main mandate of this board is actually passing on, approving statistical policies. So in the form of resolutions. And just last year, the board endorsed the declaration of a roadmap for the data revolution towards the following: greater and more efficient production and use of both official and non-official data through innovative institutional arrangements and partnerships and new technologies and processes. Second is increased cooperation and coordination between local, regional, and international statistical systems towards data comparability across time and location. Third is, I think this is very important, political leadership that recognizes the fundamental importance of data, the necessity of adequate and sustainable funding to national statistical systems, and fourth, strengthened commitment to developing capacity to ensure a future of robust, independent, and effective national statistical systems. So I'm not sure whether the group can take this off as the ingredients that are necessary for us to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Excellent. And that is, I mean, you're setting a new gold standard for us. And certainly would love to share that through a wider community of practice that I would think could evolve from this, the people that are with us in Cartagena, but going forward into some kind of more structured partnership. Dr. Nini, would you like to have a 1-minute last thought of any sort, and particularly specific suggestions about the global partnership or specific suggestions on what you're going to do nationally to further strengthen the work of the NSO?
In Myanmar, we have, some of the data from the census said that we have only 30% of the household has electricity. Only about 6% of the household has internet access, and about 3% has a mobile phone. So
6% internet, 3% mobile phone.
Yeah, so that is in that kind of in situation, we face a lot of challenges. So it is, I think it's their experience is shared by many other developing countries also. So in the long run, we will have a lot of challenges. Because when I came here, it seems that I came from a different environment, and here I was opening up and big data, open data, and I was wondering, how can a country like Myanmar and other countries can catch up with that kind of big data or open data, other technical technology. Only 30% of the household have the electricity. So I think we have a very, very big challenges like resources, infrastructure. So I think there is a very big gap with other countries. So it is like a, dream very far away for us.
Okay, thank you very much. Werner.
Yeah, on the global partnership, returning to the first point that was mentioned, I think the data revolution and the global partnership should have a clear objective. And for me, the objective would be to increase the supply of good policies and the demand of good policies through informed policymakers and informed societies. And data is a crucial thing in order to accomplish that goal. And I think that it is very important for acknowledging the gaps between countries that have huge amounts of data and have are facing different challenge that countries that are facing maybe the challenge of not having enough data or not having institutions that promote the access of this data. And in a way, the global partnership, it's crucial for both type of countries because, as you were mentioning yesterday, institutions are very hard to change. And the people who study institutions says that you need like an alignment of planets to change these institutions, and the global partnership might provide this alignment of planets. So it's an opportunity for countries for taking advantage of this political momentum and provoke this change from my point of view.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Ricardo.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree. I mean, probably because I said it, it is that, that we need a goal, an objective. And I think that objective, like my own view should be empower people with the use of data. So bring that fifth actor into this data revolution. So I think that should be the goal. And I think a global partnership should look like, so who's got the data, who's got the money, who's got the skills? We need to map that. Who's got the connections and the networks, and who's got the political will to actually bring people to the data revolution and increase accountability, increase empowerment, increase the voice, especially of those marginalized. Because I mean, one of the things that we see in these 2 days is that there is a group that's being uncounted, and part of the group that's being uncounted is the ultra rich too. You know, so like, I mean, they fall off the tax registers and the like. But anyway, I mean, I think that should be the objective, and a global partnership should identify what each of the actors could bring to the table, and use the fact that like there are several actors, and make that partnership, each member of that partnership hold each other to account. So if the private sector brings the data, you know, the rest will hold accountable. Will hold the private sector accountable to the release of that data. If the international statistical system and the international NGOs have the networks to the communities, then the rest of the systems of the partnership holds us to account to actually reach out to the communities. But I do think that we need the vision, and we need the mapping of what each actor will bring to the table, and then the commitment and the mechanisms to hold each other to account. So one final thought, you know, like I was thinking when we were talking, maybe we don't need a data revolution, maybe we need a data reformation. Because one of the things that happened during the Reformation was that, like, I mean, so masses were started to be given in the vernacular language instead of Latin. And that empowered people, you know, because they finally understood what the priest was saying, you know? And so we need that. We need that people understand what's behind the statistics that are being published, you know? So maybe we don't need a data revolution. Maybe we need a data reformation.
So, great. Very nice last words. This is what we're going to do now. I'm going to wrap up this session. I'm going to hand the floor over to our dear host colleague, and Johannes will have a couple words. So on this session in particular, it's been great, and I love it that we had standing room only, and you were fighting for the seats, and people could really get engaged. So I want to start first by thanking those of you who came into the fishbowl, and the few of you that are still here. I think that's really great, and let's give a round of applause to them. And of course, also to our lovely center stage fish for sharing, I think, a very candid discussion on this tension. The tension's real, but what I saw and what I feel, it started with a real tension, but the discussion itself starts to unpack that tension, get a better understanding that there are two sides, that we can find commonalities, we can find solutions, we can start to see a way forward. And we see such diversity from the country experiences that we're having. We see similar diversity in the population that we have around us right now. It is really quite an eclectic gathering that we have here. So we've been very lucky. And this discussion, I think, takes us one step further forward. What we'll be looking for, and I really hope this comes out in further discussion about the partnership, is how to keep this discussion alive. Keep the tensions coming into the middle of the table, not on the periphery, not the divisive kinds of things that have to do with power and control, but collaboration, and collaboration with the people behind the data, so that we always have in mind the end result of all of our efforts is sustainable, inclusive, equitable growth and development. And so I think this kind of discussion is fascinating. I'd love to see this happening at regional economic commissions. I'd love to see this happening. And when I think of partnerships, the closer you get to the people, the more powerful the partnership. But at national level, it can happen at subnational level. These kinds of partnerships that would build the literacy or the reform, the new kinds of orientation to the power of data. This can happen throughout virtually every level in the system. And national statistical offices are very well placed to be able to orchestrate or facilitate that. And many of the partners in this room are willing, I think, both financially, technically, whether it's a co-convening role, whether it's technical role, whether it's facilitating South-South cooperation. There's so many different ways that we can support the national systems to do so. And we've heard quite a few of those good examples here today. So I'm really pleased with this session, especially I want to thank the audience for staying with us through the end of a very, very long day. I mean, it's been intense since yesterday, and I think it's been very, very useful. If I could now just hand over to our host.
Bueno, algunas de las conclusiones que podemos extraer de la primera sesión y de la segunda. Lo primero es clarísimo la necesidad de fortalecer los marcos jurídicos para un más amplio y mejor uso y acceso, por un lado, a registros administrativos y por otro, a lo que hemos venido hablando del Big Data y cómo este puede ser usado para fines estadísticos. Lo segundo es los institutos nacionales de estadística deben fortalecer las acciones de Open Data con el fin de avanzar muchísimo más en la revolución de los datos y como condición necesaria para la revolución de los datos, en especial en lo que tiene que ver con mayor información a los ciudadanos. Y se debe buscar un mayor equilibrio entre el uso de fuentes tradicionales de información y las nuevas fuentes. Es decir, no se puede pensar que solo a partir de nuevas fuentes se va a tener toda la información necesaria y por eso hay que hacer una combinación entre las fuentes tradicionales y las nuevas fuentes. Y pues dentro de las nuevas fuentes hay que determinar cuáles tienen efectivamente uso para fines estadísticos y que pueden cumplir, digamos, con algunas condiciones de calidad. Y esto pues es especialmente cierto cuando se pone en perspectiva las necesidades de información y de monitoreo que va a exigir los nuevos objetivos de desarrollo sostenible. En la segunda jornada podemos digamos, destacar varios aspectos. Uno, muy importante, uno podría decir que el Big Data pone, dijéramos, a ciertos institutos estadísticos en riesgo a aquellos institutos estadísticos que por razones políticas o por razones de no tener la fortaleza financiera o fiscal y la fortaleza de que sea necesario en cuanto a las estadísticas que produce, pueden verse sometidos a serios riesgos de perder sus posibilidades y sus capacidades de generación de información, mientras aquellos en los que existen institutos estadísticos más consolidados, mucho más fuertes, que son mucho más usados a través de distintos actores, pues tienen mayores oportunidades y mayores posibilidades de hacer parte de toda esta revolución de los datos y del Big Data. Uno de los expositores planteaba de que en ese mapeo de actores hoy en día en relación con el Big Data, los actores privados son muy fuertes, son muy poderosos porque principalmente tienen la información, de tal manera que uno, si combina las conclusiones de la jornada 1 con la de la 2, pues estos marcos jurídicos, por un lado, se vuelven fundamentales en términos de las posibilidades de desarrollo del Big Data, y en segundo lugar, otro tema fundamental es de que esos marcos jurídicos tienen que además incluir la necesidad de generar alianzas y redes para un mayor acceso y para una mayor posibilidad de compartir información. Es necesario alfabetizar a la ciudadanía en temas estadísticos para una más y mejor lectura de la información y sobre todo pues para entender más las decisiones de política pública, tanto pues desde lo local hasta los distintos órdenes. Hay que hacer más amigables los datos, más fáciles de entender, para que pueda haber una mayor interpretación de las estadísticas. Sin duda, al estar asociado toda esta revolución de los datos con los temas de Open Data, pues esto trae nuevas demandas, nuevos actores, nuevas necesidades de información y mayor exigencia de participación, y eso pues hay que necesariamente tenerlo en cuenta y debe hacer parte de ese marco jurídico que se planteaba en la sesión 2 y poder fortalecer esos mecanismos de mayor participación y de esas nuevas demandas de nuevos actores, entre otras, para que pues no haya, como ha sido mencionado en varias otras sesiones, no solo hoy, para que esas personas, ciudadanos y ciudadanas no contados, pues dejen de serlo, y esto debe ser parte fundamental de este proceso. Ese sería como básicamente, muy rápidamente, algunas de las conclusiones.
Thank you. Excellent summary. Very detailed, and that's certainly going to help us to wrap this up. And we are looking forward to detailed notes from each one of the sessions that really guide us as much as possible through the highlights, the main messages, but also the kinds of partnership possibilities that we have and next steps that we're going to be taking. So with that, I'd really like to thank everyone again. One last round of applause, if I could, for everybody's very active participation. It was a great session. And we now have time, if I understand correctly, to get freshened up, and you'll be picked up by your ride at between 7 and 7:30 at your various hotels. So thanks once again. Huge thanks to Johannes for co-facilitating, and Mauricio as well for the leadership, for all the members of the Fish Bowl. Thanks so much.